Chapter 468. Going around the screen, Han Jin saw a hole in the floor in the corner that could only fit one person. There were a few medium-sized metal boxes on the side, and judging from their size, they were just big enough to fit through the hole. Guevara went in first and stepped on an extremely narrow ladder to reach the bottom. There was a magic lamp on the wall. Although the light was not very bright, it was enough to illuminate the entire basement. Han Jin was surprised to see a large pile of magic crystals on the ground. He quickly walked over and casually picked up 2 magic crystals. They were both magic crystals of the earth element, sparkling and full. At first glance, he could tell that they were top-grade magic crystals. Even the lowest quality magic crystal was at least 9th grade. Magic crystals of 8th and 9th grade were still considered to be in circulation, but magic crystals of 10th grade were considered to be the private collection of powerful people with power and status. Normally, they would not be circulated in the market. The total value of so many magic crystals of 10th grade was difficult to estimate. It could even be compared to what he had gained from wiping out the orcs. "Where did you find so many magic crystals?" Han Jin asked blankly. "This is the good news I wanted to tell you." Guevara smiled. "We found Morgan's treasure." "Morgan's treasure? How did you find it? Does Chile know about it? Is Morgan's treasure underground? Did Majordomo Gale discover the army of the Abyss World while searching for Morgan's treasure?" Han Jin asked a series of questions. "Slow down. How do you expect me to answer so many questions at once?" Guevara smiled. Sunir contributed the most to finding Morgan's treasure. Ever since she knew that there was a holy battle robe in Morgan's treasure, she had been thinking about it. "Haha, you already have the glorious pendant and the Lion King's shield, so she wanted to get the other parts of the divine equipment for you. However, she was afraid that you would be worried about her, so she didn't tell you." "Of course, she didn't tell me either. When you went to Cold Shadow City, she went underground with Majordomo Gale, Gao Bin, and Yelena." Guevara knew that Yelena had given the battle robe of light to Sunir and asked her to personally give it to Han Jin. He didn't need to be the bad guy, so he cooperated with Yelena to highlight Sunir's contributions. In fact, Guevara did not hate Sunir. On the contrary, it was Sunir who hated him. When they first met, Sunir had always been cold to him. However, he was magnanimous and understood that Sunir could not let go of the past hatred. Most of the time, he used silence to respond to Sunir's attacks. At that time, he did not make a fuss about it, and now, he would not make a fuss about it. To him, this was a good thing to push the boat along with the current. "Sunir." Han Jin let out a long sigh. "Does Chile know?" "I've already talked to her," Guevara replied. "This is Morgan and Company's property. We can't touch it." Han Jin slowly put down the magic crystals. "Hogan, calculate the numbers. You must give all the magic crystals to Chile. Do you understand what I mean?" "Ah." Hogan was shocked. But everyone didn't seem to have decided on this. However, he didn't dare to reject Han Jin's words, so he just nodded randomly. Guevara's eyes were filled with admiration. The more time he spent with Han Jin, the more he liked this young man. Han Jin was also greedy, but he kept his limits. At least, he would not steal his friends' things. This kind of character and persistence was very rare in all rulers who held the power of life and death. Guevara asked himself, if it were him, he might not have been able to do what Han Jin did. "Raphael, what you see is only a small part of it, a very small part," Guevara said with a smile. Guevara smiled. "Moreover, this doesn't belong to the Morgan Commercial Corporation. Do you really think a commercial corp can accumulate so much wealth that can rival a country?" "Mr. Guevara, what do you mean?" Han Jin's face became serious. After listening to Guevara's words, his first reaction was that Guevara had realized the value of this batch of magic crystals and wanted to take it by force. He had already talked to Chile. To put it bluntly, he was using threats and promises. Chile and Han Jin were both orphans. The only people they could rely on were their friends. If Gavara personally came forward, Chili could only bow her head. Although she knew that Gavara was doing this for him, Han Jin would never allow such a thing to happen. Today they could bully one of their own for the sake of magic crystals. Tomorrow they could start fighting each other for something else. Actually, the existence of this treasure is much older than Morgan and company. Gavara explained softly. We guessed that it might have been left behind by the Abyssal race at the end of the First World War. At that time, there was a rebellion in the Abyssal world. Those who knew about this treasure should have died one after another. It has become an ownerless treasure. However, Morgan and company was the first to discover it. No. Han Jin shook his head decisively. Mr. Gavara, we can't do this. Are you suspecting that I threatened Miss Chili? Gavara smiled bitterly. How about this, you go and talk to Chili yourself. Although Gavara's tone sounded very aggrieved, his heart was very calm. He was also touched once again. He had a guess that he couldn't tell anyone. When Han Jin showed off his abilities in isolated Cliff City, he clearly showed the potential of being the Star of Hope. Why did the elves give up on Han Jin and turn against him? Gavara believed that whether the elves could accept Han Jin or not, his existence would be a huge obstacle. Perhaps the elves had already sent people to contact Han Jin, but they were rejected by Han Jin. Perhaps, because of Gavara, the elves didn't even want to talk and directly started a war. No matter what, he was partly responsible for the hostility between Han Jin and the elves. If Han Jin didn't talk about it, he couldn't verify his guess. However, he knew that just like how Han Jin defended Chili, Han Jin would also defend him in the past, present, and future. We'll talk about it later. Han Jin paused and said sternly, Hogan, do you remember what I said? I remember. Hogan hurriedly replied and then glanced at Yelena. He felt very aggrieved. If he knew that this all belonged to Chili, he wouldn't have worked so hard for nothing. Madam, please say something. Gavara felt helpless. He understood that Han Jin's scolding of Hogan was meant for him to hear, because his actions had already made Han Jin somewhat dissatisfied. Han Jin's expression softened a little, then he looked at Yelena and said, Oh right, Yelena, help me make a trip. What do you want me to do? Yelena asked in a low voice. Although her heart was full of reluctance, Yelena had the cunning of a little woman. Now that Han Jin was unhappy, she wouldn't go against him. She would let others be the bad guy. She would always be the most gentle and lovely little wife. Go to the Vatican and find Jedis. Tell him to wait for me on the God of War. Okay. Yelena replied and then turned around and walked towards the wooden ladder. Han Jin winked at Gibran. Gibran understood that Han Jin had something to discuss with Gavara, so he pulled Kane and Julia out. Only Hogan didn't notice Han Jin's signal. He was still staring at the pile of magic crystals in a daze. He was excited for nothing, and worked hard for nothing, Hogan? Yes, master. Hogan trembled and immediately turned his head. You go out first. Oh. Hogan followed Julia and walked up the wooden ladder. Adolphe came back a long time ago, but you were missing for so many days. Under such circumstances, you have no reason to ignore the Holy Crown City. Gavara smiled and said, Tell me, what did you do? I brought someone back. Han Jin smiled. Although he was a little unhappy just now, in his mind, Gavara was always the old man he trusted the most. He couldn't hide this matter from Gavara. Someone? Who? You should know, Greenzing. Who did you say it was? Gavara's face became stiff. Grand Magus, Grand Alchemist, Greenzing. Han Jin added. Wasn't he executed by the Dragon Realm? Gavara asked blankly. You went to the Dragon Realm? Yes, Shazos invited me to the Dragon Realm as a guest. Han Jin replied. The Dragon Realm didn't execute Greenzing. They just sealed his magic power and made him their servant. I can see how much they hate this human and have been trying to humiliate him. Is it really Greenzing? Guevara still couldn't believe it. When Green Zeng created the miracle, he was still imprisoned by Zigund. However, when he chatted with Jedz, he had heard this name many times and knew the power of the demon annihilation crossbow. Zenglin and Jeddis were originally the right-hand men of the Grand Light Emperor Nicholas. Of course, there was a huge difference between an assistant and a subservient slave. Moreover, those who had reached such heights were all extraordinary characters. They had enough pride, so they would never become someone's slave. Talent and servility were eternal opposites. Many rulers tried to find an assistant who had both, but in reality, it was close to impossible. A person with a strong servility would definitely have limited talent, and a person with overflowing talent would often not be willing to bow and bend their knees. In any case, Green Zeng and Jedz had contributed to the stability and development of the Nicholas group. Unfortunately, they were abandoned by Nicholas in the end. One was sold to the Dragon Realm, and the other was killed by Nicholas himself. If Han Jin's personality was similar to Nicholas, he would definitely try to subdue Jedz. However, Han Jin couldn't do that. For him, being friends with Jedz was enough. He despised the Holy See and valued his friendship with Pope Jedz. These contradictions should have been tit for tat, but in Han Jin, they seemed very harmonious. Perhaps this was his personal style. Of course. Why would I lie to you about this? Han Jin laughed. The more Guevara lost his composure, the more pleased he was. After all, he had brought someone back from the Dragon Realm. This was something that was close to impossible. Good. That's great. Guevara finally came back to his senses. He was so excited that his face was glowing. After a pause, he said seriously, Raphael, although this is great news, we must be very, very careful. We all know what happened to Nicholas. If the Dragon Realm finds out, I was worried about this before. Han Jin laughed and said, but now, even if the Dragon Realm finds out, they can't even take care of themselves. You mean the Second World War is about to break out? That's right. Black Dragon King Fanlunding is still alive, but Golden Dragon King Mi Lu died in the war between Dragon City and Dragon Realm. What are they going to rely on to fight against the Black Dragons? How do you know that the Black Dragons will definitely go against Dragon City and the Dragon Realm? Guevara asked. Majordomo Gale saw that there were at least 10 Black Dragons in this war zone. Maybe the Black Dragon King Valentine wants to completely destroy the Titans? I have a feeling, Han Jin said, although the Black Dragon King Valentine hates the Titans, it was the Golden Dragon who drove the Black Dragons underground. Moreover, the Black Dragons won the battle at Cloud Top City. If he had to choose an opponent, Valentine could only choose the Golden Dragon. Fanlunding has such strength? Guevara said. The Black Dragons suffered heavy losses in the battle at Cloud Top City, and they were suddenly attacked by the Golden Dragon clan. They were on the verge of extinction, so they had no choice but to hide underground. What will they use to fight against Dragon City and the Dragon Realm? The information I have is slightly different from yours. Han Jin shook his head. After the Black Dragons hid underground, they realized that the Abyss world was more suitable for them to live in. For example, Valentine could become one of the 3 giants of the Abyss. This is enough to prove the strength of the Black Dragons. That's true, but we still have to be careful. Although Guevara was convinced by Han Jin, he would not change his way of doing things. The more important the matter was, the more cautious he had to be. I know. Han Jin nodded. Other than me, don't tell anyone else. Guevara instructed. I can't do it. Han Jin smiled. Why? Can you save Zenglin? Han Jin shrugged. If you can, what's wrong with Zenglin? Guevara hurriedly asked. He's dying. The Dragon Realm finally decided to kill him. Guevara's eyes flashed. It's me. You? How did you? Guevara was shocked. Mr. Guevara, do you think that the Dragon Realm will let Zenglin go? A helpless smile appeared on Han Jin's face. Or maybe I can challenge the entire dragon field and swagger away with Glyn? I understand now. Guevara was stunned for a moment, then he suddenly understood. You asked Jeds to wait for you on the God of War to save Xingling, right? But he only has one chance in his life. If Xingling's injuries are too serious, he won't be able to do anything. Then let Jeds arrange it. He's not the only priest in the Vatican. Han Jin said. If there was no other way, there was still Adolf. Since he could bring Xingling back, he believed that he could save Xingling. Then, Han Jin asked, what about Sunir and the others? Where are they? They're all in the treasure room. Guevara said, there's a crack in the treasure room that leads to the barracks of the Abyss World, so, when Han Jin returned to the God of War, Jeds was already waiting on the ship. When he saw Han Jin, he smiled and said, the King of the Holy Crown City, welcome back. Although his words were respectful, his expression was the same as usual. He only had a peaceful smile and did not get up to greet him. It was as if he did not care about this king at all. You want to be a bard? You should learn more from Sasu in this aspect. At least, his flattery is more natural than yours. Han Jin smiled and said directly, come, Jeds, I'll take you to a place. Where? Jeds was stunned, then said, if it's a long trip, I might not be able to leave. It's on the ship. Han Jin walked towards the stairs. Jeds got up and followed behind Han Jin. He was too lazy to ask what they were going to do. Jeds, why are you acting so weird today? Han Jin said as they walked. You mean the praise just now? Am I such a failure? Jed smiled and said, but, that's what I really mean. What do you mean? Han Jin asked, puzzled. Adolf has become a completely different person. Jeds was silent for a moment, then sighed and said, Raphael, tell me, how did you do it? He. Han Jin smiled but did not answer. He immediately changed the topic. Is your relationship with Adolf better now? Do you want to hear the truth or a lie? Of course I want to hear a lie. That's extremely rare. Han Jin said, can you break the promise you made when you were young? Okay. Jeds was a little helpless. He had just said it casually to highlight his feelings, but who knew that Han Jin would take his words to heart? My relationship with Adolf is even more tense than before. Why is that? Han Jin's footsteps came to an abrupt halt. To be honest, I hope that the future Holy See will be independent and detached. It won't interfere in worldly affairs, and it will wholeheartedly persuade people to do good. The Holy See can cooperate with you and fight against all the evil in the world, but it can't be the sword in your hand. Raphael, do you understand what I mean? Jed smiled bitterly. In the past, Adolf's style was too tough. I was afraid that he would destroy our relationship, and now Adolf is too. Han Jin was stunned for a moment, then smiled bitterly. He understood what Jed's meant. Their philosophies were incompatible. In the past, Adolf only accused me of being too cowardly and not knowing how to fight for the Holy See. Now, Jeds hesitated. Now what did he say about you? Han Jin asked. Now it's even worse. He almost categorized me as a blasphemer. His personality is really extreme. Han Jin sighed. Jeds nodded vigorously, then couldn't help but repeat, Raphael, what did you do? You made Adolf change so much. He actually said that you... What did he say about me? He said that you have the power of creation, and that you... Jeds really couldn't continue. In fact, his thoughts were similar to those of the Dragon Territory and Dragon City. Han Jin had most likely obtained something left behind by a god on the continent by coincidence. This judgment was fair and reasonable, but Adolf's speculation was too crazy. Those words couldn't be said carelessly, or else he would be a complete blasphemer. Chapter 469. Let's not talk about Adolf. Han Jin sighed. By the way, where is your scepter? Let me have a look. What are you going to do? Jedis asked as he took out the angel scepter. Han Jin reached out to take it. Jedis did not suspect anything and handed the angel scepter to Han Jin. Han Jin played with it for a moment and smiled. It's very beautiful. Let me keep it for a while. No way. Jedis was stunned, then smiled bitterly. Raphael, if it was any other scepter, I would give it to you, but this is a memento of my mentor. Why are you nervous? Why would I cheat you of something? I'll return it to you in a while. Han Jin smiled and stepped aside. Please come in. Jedis looked around. The direction Han Jin stepped aside was a seamless wall. He said helplessly, Where do you want me to go in? However, as soon as Jedis' voice fell, a door appeared in front of him. What was even more bizarre was that the door seemed to be transparent. Jedis could clearly see that there was an endless starry sky inside. Jedis was stunned for a moment. This is my magic laboratory. I once overheard Yelena and Guevara talking. They mentioned a magic laboratory. Is this the place they were talking about? Haha. Jedis smiled and slowly walked in. Jedis was very clear about the size of the god of war, but this starry sky seemed to be countless times larger than the god of war. Was this an illusion or a domain? Jedis was shocked by his own thoughts. A domain was not something that an ordinary life form could possess. Only gods could open up their own domains in the void. A few days ago, he thought Adolf's idea was ridiculous, but now, he felt the same way. It's so beautiful. Jed sighed. The next moment, his gaze fell on the glowing crystal in the middle, and his expression kept changing. At first, he was stunned because he felt a sense of déjà vu. Then, he was surprised because he recognized that this was most likely the holy crystal of the Holy See. Then, he hesitated. Impossible, right? The Saint Crystal had already been taken away by Long Yu. How could it be on the god of war? Jeds walked stiffly towards the crystal bit by bit. As he got closer, he carefully observed it. After a moment, he reached out his hand and touched the crystal bit by bit with his trembling fingertip. By this time, his face had turned ashen. Han Jin didn't say a word. He just silently played with Jed's angelic scepter. He didn't want to disturb Jed's, so he let Jed's guess, think, and then talk. After an unknown amount of time, Jed's complexion had returned to normal, but it was still slightly pale. He let out a long sigh and slowly turned around with great difficulty. He looked coldly at Han Jin and said, So that's how it is. I understand now. What do you understand? Han Jin raised his head and asked indifferently. You already have the obedient Adolf. My existence is a little redundant. Jed smiled and said, However, I still have to thank you. After all, you let me see the truth. Jed's tone was as calm as Han Jin's, and he had the same smile on his face as before. However, only he knew that his heart was in pain. Although he had only known Han Jin for more than a year, his trust in Han Jin had far exceeded that of Nicholas, who had grown up with him. Not only because Han Jin had helped him when he was in trouble, but also because of Han Jin's attitude towards his friends. Because Han Jin always chose to face danger alone. Many things added together made Jeds think that this young lord, who was 10 years younger than him, had a pure heart. He was too precious to be able to keep his principles in this world where the strong preyed on the weak. If he didn't trust such a person, who else could he trust? But it turned out that he was wrong once again. Nicholas' sword didn't destroy his persistence and pursuit of his ideals, but Han Jin's betrayal was much more serious than the swords. You understand? But I don't quite understand, Han Jin said softly. You are my friend. I never thought that you were superfluous. For you and me, the word friend, isn't it too extravagant? Jed smiled and said, You deliberately took away my angel's scepter. That was right. Without it, my power will indeed weaken a lot, but, for the sake of your friend, I still have to warn you that it won't be easy to keep me under this starry sky. You have to be careful or you will pay a heavy price. Han Jin's expression was very complicated. He never thought that Jed's reaction would be so intense. Han Jin's judgment of human nature was still lacking compared to Solomon's. In fact, friendship was also a kind of feeling. When he thought that Sunir had betrayed him, what did he do? Jed's reaction was completely reasonable. The two of them quietly confronted each other. Han Jin suddenly laughed self-deprecatingly, then threw the angel's scepter back to Jed's. Jed's, I repeat, I treat you as a friend, now and in the future. Lord Raphael, you are so humorous. Jed's caught the angel's scepter and laughed even more heartily. Do we still have a future? Yes. Han Jin pretended not to understand Jed's sarcasm. I brought you here to let you see our future. Thank you, Jed said slowly. I have seen it. Can we begin now? You didn't see it. Han Jin pointed to the side. Do you know who he is? Jed's glanced in the direction Han Jin pointed, then immediately turned his gaze back, because he already regarded Han Jin as an enemy. Although Han Jin returned the angel's scepter to him, who could guarantee that Han Jin didn't have any other schemes? So he was very careful. However, when his gaze returned to Han Jin, there was a trace of astonishment on his face. He didn't want to risk looking away again, but he couldn't help it. It's him? Xinglin? Jed's exclaimed. Jed's, frankly speaking, if I wanted to kill you here, you wouldn't have the power to fight back. Han Jin said softly, then. I beg you, trust me one last time. Go and see him. Calm down, and then I'll give you an explanation. The angel's scepter in Jed's hand slowly fell down. Although Han Jin's words had hurt his self-esteem, he also knew that Han Jin wasn't lying. Whether this was Han Jin territory or not, it was still Han Jin territory. Moreover, there were two angels floating quietly in the air next to him. He really didn't have the power to fight against Han Jin. Moreover, Han Jin's tone was no longer pleading. He could faintly hear a hint of pleading. After a moment of silence, Jed sighed softly. His heart softened again. Since he was definitely no match for Han Jin, why did he still need to be vigilant? Let go. Jedis quickly walked over to Garen and bent down to observe him carefully. He immediately sensed that there was a very powerful seal on Garen's body that had sealed away all of his magic. Although Garen's appearance had changed a lot and he was much thinner than before, Jedis was sure that he was not mistaken because they had known each other for a long time. It's really Xinglin? Jed's expression changed again. In fact, he and Xinglin didn't have a good relationship before. One represented the magician group, while the other was the spokesperson of the Vatican. The competition between them was very fierce. However, things were different now. They had both been abandoned by Nicholas. As the saying goes, fellow sufferers empathize with each other. Jed's heart was full of sympathy for Xinglin. Wasn't Xinglin executed by the Dragon Realm? How could he be here with you? Jed suddenly raised his head. Have you calmed down? What I need now is not calming down, but the truth. Jed said word by word. There are too many facts. Where do you want me to start? Han Jin slowly sat down. So, you should calm down and think about it. Then I'll explain it to you. Jed's mind was in a mess. If Han Jin and the Dragon Realm were working together to steal the Holy Crystal of the Vatican, then why would the Dragon Realm give Xinglin to Han Jin? Jed's was very clear about Xinglin's value. It could even be said that this legendary great magician and great alchemist was born to destroy the Dragon City and the Dragon Realm. There was no way the Dragon Realm would hand over such a deadly weapon. What happened? After an unknown amount of time, Han Jin slowly said, Jeds, do you know? I really admire your ideals. The Vatican should be independent. I admit that I need your help now, but I've never thought of turning the Vatican into my own weapon. Jeds responded absent-mindedly. Although he was also a top figure, the current situation was too bizarre and he was a little confused. However, if I want to realize my ideals, or if you want to realize yours, we will both face the same threat. Han Jin smiled. The giant dragons don't want to see a powerful Vatican, nor do they want to see the continent reunited. It's only good for them to keep the continent divided. I know. So, it's impossible for me to really work with the Dragon Realm. In other words, you admit to working together? Actually, the threat we face isn't just limited to Dragon City and the Dragon Realm. Han Jin slowly stood up and walked in front of the shining crystal. What do you think this is? Don't tell me you don't know. This is the Holy Crystal of the Vatican. Holy Crystal is just its name. Han Jin smiled. I'm asking, do you know what this is? Of course I know, Jed said slowly. The Holy Crystal is a miracle left behind by the God of Light on the continent. In the Age of Gods, the God of Light saw what happened to his believers. So you shed tears? And then turned into Holy Crystal? Jeds, don't try to brush me off with something from the legends. Han Jin laughed. Even if what you said is true, then I'm curious. Could it be that the God of Light is similar to Garrett and only has one eye? Otherwise, why would there only be one large holy crystal? Raphael, you are blaspheming the gods. Hee Jeds, I'll ask you again. Do you know what this is? Han Jin said. I'm asking about its use. Jeds hesitated for a moment. The Holy Crystal has always been placed in the main hall of the Unsetting Sun Mountains, just for believers to worship? Han Jin laughed. Such a precious thing only has such a small use? Do you believe it yourself? You think the Holy Crystal is very precious? Jeds asked. You are a believer. Do you think the Holy Crystal is not precious? Han Jin's smile was a little strange. That's not what I meant. Jeds also knew that he had misspoken. The Holy Crystal had always been a symbol of the glory of the God of Light, but Han Jin's words clearly implied that the Holy Crystal had a very rare ability. He was asking about the function of the Holy Crystal, but Han Jin deliberately pretended to be confused, so he could only ask himself. Raphael, tell me, what is the use of the Holy Crystal? Let me give you an example. Han Jin looked around. If there were no Holy Crystal, this magic laboratory of mine would not have been built at all. Do you know the function of this magic laboratory? It can extract elements from any magic crystal at will and turn this place into a sea of elements. Mages and warriors who have the corresponding elements can practice here, and their progress can be described as leaps and bounds. No wonder Yelena miraculously reached the pinnacle. If she can successfully break through, she will become the youngest Grand Magus on the continent after you. Jeds gasped. He immediately realized the consequences. This magic laboratory could even mass-produce powerhouses. This is the function of the Holy Crystal. Han Jin smiled. In fact, there is more than one Holy Crystal. Adolf also has one. Every ascetic is a demigod powerhouse. Didn't you find it strange before? To be honest, the inheritance of the ascetics is completed with holy crystals. What did you say? The ascetics also have holy crystals? Jed's eyes widened. Of course, Han Jin pondered for a moment. Let me tell you about the tarantula. Do you know this kind of magical beast? Yes, it's a useless magical beast. Not only is it useless, but it's also incompetent. It doesn't have any fighting power, and can only rely on insects and ants for food. Its appetite is also very large. But why hasn't this useless and incompetent magical beast gone extinct? What do they rely on to survive? What do they rely on? Jed's thoughts were now completely led by Han Jin. They build webs, but they won't stay in the same place. Otherwise, they will only starve to death. Han Jin slowly said, under normal circumstances, a tarantula will continuously run in a circle with a diameter of about 100 miles, spinning a web as it goes. When it returns to its original position, it will find that the web it had spun dozens of days ago is already covered with insects and ants. After it has eaten its fill, it will destroy the original web and spin a new one. Then, it will run forward again, and in this way, there will be endless food waiting for it ahead. You suddenly mentioned the tarantula. What do you mean? You still don't understand. Han Jin smiled. A holy crystal that can absorb various elements is placed there for believers to worship. Do you really not understand what this means? Jed shook his head, but he shook his head very slowly. His expression was full of hesitation. Obviously, he had vaguely guessed something, but he couldn't and didn't dare to say it. The holy crystal is the net left for you. Han Jin's smile was full of ridicule. For you, the Lord God of Light is the only one, but for the Lord God of Light you are not the only believers. When you have the ability to break through space, you will find that you can find as many planes as you can find. Jed's almost jumped up. Han Jin's words were the most vicious attack on a god in all of history. Even though he had a calm temperament, he couldn't help but tremble. There's nothing to be surprised about, Han Jin said indifferently. You are also a powerhouse standing at the peak of the continent. If you were locked up and starved for half a year, would you still be able to survive? Gods also need food. Even if they didn't starve to death, they would still want to become stronger and stronger, right? Raphael, you are crazy. Jed's lips trembled, and he could even hear his teeth chattering. At first, he thought that Han Jin was going to kill him. A powerhouse who could remain calm in the face of death was now so scared that he almost collapsed. This was enough to prove how shocking Han Jin's words were. I'm crazy? Jeds, do you really think so? Han Jin smiled. After a moment, he sighed and said without rhyme or reason, the asterisk is coming. What is asterisk? Jeds immediately asked. Although he accused Han Jin of being crazy, deep in his heart there was still a thirst for the truth. A harvest season. Han Jin smiled. To put it bluntly, the demonic wolf spiders are coming back. Maybe in 1,000 years, maybe in 800 years. We don't have much time. Of course, this "we" does not include you, because you still don't believe it. You're talking about Grand Duke Solomon? Jeds knew very well that Han had only undergone a huge change after entering the elemental capital once. The only person who could reach a consensus on such an extremely crazy issue was probably the mysterious Solomon that everyone found unfathomable. Han Jin smiled but did not answer. He only gently stroked the holy crystal with his hand. Jeds, do you know how much power is contained in this? If I give all this power to Adolf, I can even create a god out of thin air. Of course, his power is far from being comparable to the Lord God of Light, but he should be stronger than the Angel of Might, Alpha. Jeds only felt that his head had been split in half by an inexplicable force. One of him was telling himself to leave immediately. Since Han Jin did not want to hurt him, then he should not care about anything and stay away from this madman. The other part of him was telling himself to stay. He had to ask clearly what kind of existence those powerful gods in the Age of Gods were. But I don't dare to move. Han Jin shook his head helplessly. The Lord God of Light is much stronger than the demonic wolf spiders. What if, Raphael, if you do this, you will bring disaster to everyone around you? Jeds knew that using the safety of his friends to remind Han Jin was the most effective. Chapter 470. Do you think I need you to remind me of this kind of thing? Han Jin smiled. I know better than you what kind of danger we might face, haha. I have already thought of a way out. If it's really as you say, and the gods will return to this continent, where can you go? Jed sneered. He wasn't sneering maliciously. He had learned too many secrets today, and understood that Han Jin didn't want to hurt him, so he hoped that he could make Han Jin forget about these crazy ideas. Or, he could think about it, but he couldn't do anything about it. Han Jin quietly looked at the bright stars and didn't answer Jed's question. Jeds, on the other hand, couldn't laugh anymore. Could it be that this is really Han Jin's domain? Has he already mastered the secrets of the domain? Do you believe me or not? Han Jin suddenly asked. Or are you desperately warning yourself to never believe me? Are you afraid? I. Jed said a few Is, but couldn't form a complete sentence. Forget it. Han Jin smiled and slowly walked to Green's side. Jeds, do you have a way to save him? You shouldn't have come to me for this kind of thing. I can't release salvation again, Jed said softly. Jeddis replied softly, you should go find Adolf. With his persistence, even if he has to sacrifice his own life, he will complete the mission you have given him. Haha, that's right, your words are his mission. Han Jin was silent. After a long time, he bent down and plucked a small blade of grass from Green's body. Green's clothes had all been changed. This blade of grass should have been carried by the scapegoat servant when he walked into the forest and was caught by Harley. I don't know what Adolf said about me, but there's one thing he didn't say. Han Jin slowly said, I don't know if this power is the power of creation, but if you all think so, then so be it. As soon as Han Jin's voice trailed off, the tiny blade of grass slowly grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. Soon, the blade of grass grew taller and taller, bearing clusters of grass seeds. Then, the blade of grass withered, and the seeds fell onto Han Jin's palm. Following that, droplets of verdant grass sprouted, connecting into one. Suddenly, a speck of starlight broke away from the sea of stars and landed on the lush grass, turning into a ball of flame. In the blink of an eye, the grass that was full of vitality was reduced to ashes. The change wasn't over. Finally, a green sprout stubbornly emerged from the ashes and grew into a blade of grass, almost identical to the original blade of grass. Han Jin picked up the blade of grass with his fingertips and flicked it gently. The blade of grass flew out and stabbed into Green's body. Everything returned to its original state, as if nothing had happened. However, Jeds knew that it was definitely not an illusion. When the grass sprouts grew, he could feel a vigorous vitality. When the flames burned, he could also feel the scorching light of the flames. Isn't it strange? Han Jin said calmly. I can do things that only elves can do. I can use nature magic of various elements, I can heal people like you priests, and I can control undead creatures. Do you want to ask me why? Will you answer if I ask? Jeds smiled bitterly. Of course I will. Han Jin said, there's nothing strange about it. To me, there is only one essence of power. It's just that there are many ways to manifest it. You're not bragging about being omnipotent, are you? I'm not bragging, Han Jin said slowly. I'm just telling the truth. Of course, I need time. Time for what? Time for growth. With the indestructible golden body, Han Jin believed that by then, he would be qualified to deal with any existence. Jeds barely suppressed the fear in his heart. Han Jin was now a demigod master, but from Han Jin's tone, it seemed that there was still a lot of room for improvement. Jeds, I told you today, don't mention it to anyone outside. Han Jin said softly, you should know that I put the lives of many people in your hands, including mine. Do you take me for a fool? Jeds shook his head. Whether he believed it or not, he couldn't deny that he had been influenced by Han Jin. He used to regard the Holy Crystal as a symbol of the Vatican's honor, so when the Holy Crystal was stolen, he was so sad that he didn't even want to participate in the war between Han Jin and the orcs. When he saw the Holy Crystal here, he immediately thought of the worst and was even prepared to fight Han Jin to the death. But now, he felt that the Holy Crystal was no longer that important. After a moment, Jed said slowly, I really admire someone now. Who? It's not me, right? You? Wait until that day comes, Jed said angrily. It's Guevara. Why? I can't imagine how he can still smile after knowing these secrets. He doesn't know. What? Jeds was stunned. Then, why did you tell me? Jeds knew very well that Han Jin and Guevara's relationship was much deeper than his own. Han Jin also trusted Guevara more. He couldn't figure out why he would tell him secrets that even Guevara didn't know. Because you were in a very ferocious state at the time, Han Jin said with a smile. If I didn't tell you, I guess we would have become enemies by now, right? I wanted to lie to you, but the problem is that you are too cunning. Things that I made up in a hurry can't stand up to scrutiny. If you caught me red-handed, it would be even harder to explain. Jed sighed slightly. He could hear the hidden meaning in his words. I don't want to lose your friendship. We've been here for a long time, right? It's time to go out, Han Jin said. By the way, can you help me invite Adolf over? Why do you want me to suffer? Adolf and I can't even speak a few words when we meet. Jed smiled bitterly. It's better if you go by yourself. You don't even have to speak, just wave your hand and Adolf will rush over. Do I have such a big influence in his mind? Do you really not know, or are you pretending not to know? Jed's smile became even more bitter. He already thinks of you as a clone of a god who came to the human world for the Battle of Dusk recorded in the final chapter of the scripture. How is this not a big influence? A faint smile appeared on Han Jin's face, which obviously contained some complacency. Don't be happy too early. Jeds couldn't stand it, so of course he had to attack Han Jin. There are advantages and disadvantages to successfully convincing Adolf. What disadvantages? In the future, don't get too close to Yelena and Sunir, Jed said with a strange tone. Otherwise, Adolf might think of them as demons who are tempting gods to fall. You know, if Adolf wants to eliminate evil, he won't tell you in advance. It can't be that serious, right? The pride on Han Jin's face disappeared, and was replaced by a look of horror. I'm just saying it's possible, don't be too nervous, Jed said faintly. Besides, it's not impossible to solve. You have a way? Go read the scripture, you can find inspiration in it. There are 9 scriptures in total, right? How can I read all of them? If it was Solomon's collection of books, not to mention 9 big books, even if there were 9,000 big books, he would still squeeze out the time to seriously read them. However, he already had a preconceived prejudice against the teachings of the church, so he really did not want to read them. That's your business, Jed said with a smile. Okay, we should go out, don't let the people outside wait too long. After that, Jed slowly walked out, but just as he approached the faintly discernible door, it abruptly disappeared in front of him. Jed's, help me, who knows more about scriptures than you? Han Jin laughed. Jed's wouldn't recklessly rush and crash into things like Morrison's. He knew very well that Han Jin would definitely have a way to make him stay. First, he warned Han Jin about what might happen and let Han Jin worry about it himself. This could be considered a small revenge and a comeback. He didn't expect Han Jin to be so straightforward and counterattack in the blink of an eye. If he didn't say anything, what would the result be? Forget it, he would be the one at a disadvantage. Okay. I'll help you think of a way, Jed said helplessly. Jedis said helplessly, since Adolf views teaching as his everything, I think I can deal with him. That's a good friend, Han Jin said with a smile. Following his words, the door appeared in front of Jed's again. I'm not going to enter your magic lab again, no matter what, Jed said angrily. I can guarantee that you'll forget what you said tomorrow. Jed's was so angry that he wanted to swear, but on second thought it was better to be safe, just in case. With Han Jin around, he really couldn't guarantee that there wouldn't be a what if. The two walked out of the magic lab and walked up the corridor. When they reached the first floor, Han Jin's footsteps suddenly stopped. Jed's, you go out first, I have something to discuss with Chili. About Morgan's treasure? Jed's asked. As a core figure in the Holy Crown City, he had the right to know, and others would respect his authority, so when Sunir and the others rushed back to the Holy Crown City, he was immediately informed. Yes. Han Jin nodded. Jed's didn't say anything else and walked up the stairs alone, while Han Jin turned to the left and stopped in front of a door. He reached out and knocked twice, but after waiting for a moment, he didn't hear any response. Instead, he heard bursts of laughter coming from inside. Han Jin simply pushed the door open and walked in. He saw Yelena, Qi Li and Miriam laughing and talking about something. Qi Li's injury had healed, and although she still couldn't walk, she could sit up on the bed. Han Jin felt a little guilty. After Qi Li was injured, he had only come twice and said some indifferent words before leaving because he was too busy. However, Miriam was always cautious in front of him, and even her smile was very shy. Han Jin never thought that Miriam had another side to her that was in high spirits. At this moment, she was having a lot of fun with Yelena and Qi Li. Everyone knew that Miriam was Stilberg's wife, and Stilberg and Han Jin had a very special relationship. They were playmates who grew up together, and they were also master and servant who had gone through hardships together. Therefore, even though Stilberg's strength was low and his status wasn't high, no one had ever put on airs before Stilberg, and they all treated him as an equal. As the saying goes, the boat rises with the tide, and Miriam naturally received everyone's acknowledgement. If an outsider were to criticize them because they were both servants, it would be a big mistake. Not to mention whether or not Han Jin would stand up for Stilberg, the people on the ship wouldn't let him off. Yelena was aware of this, and she had always taken good care of Stilberg and Miriam. On the other hand, Miriam was a little shy in front of her, and she would always call her Mississippi. However, as time passed, she slowly changed. When there were people around, of course, she couldn't be too presumptuous, but when there was no one around, they would often chat and laugh together. "What are you talking about? Why are you so happy?" Seeing that no one was paying attention to him, Han Jin could only ask loudly. "Young master, you're here." Miriam hurriedly stood up and bowed to Han Jin. Ever since they got married, Stilberg had always doted on her, and he was almost like a henpecked husband. However, Stilberg had a principle that couldn't be violated, and that was his attitude towards Han Jin. After all, he had undergone strict education since he was young, teaching him how to be a qualified servant. There were many things that were deeply ingrained in his soul, and they couldn't be changed. For example, when Han Jin was around, they couldn't sit. When Han Jin was eating, they couldn't eat with him. Even if they were eating, when Han Jin arrived at the table, they had to obediently stop eating and stand aside to wait. In fact, Han Jin had told Stilberg many times that he didn't need to be so restrained, but Stilberg was as stubborn as Adolf. He could listen to Han Jin on other matters, but when it came to etiquette, he stuck to his own insistence. Later, Han Jin gave up, and since Stilberg could be at ease, he let him be. "Raphael, how could you not knock?" Yelena was a little embarrassed. She had laughed so carelessly just now. In her own words, it must have been very ugly and not in line with the demeanor of a lady. Being caught red-handed, of course she would fly into a rage out of humiliation. "I knocked." "No." Yelena turned around and asked, "Qi Li, did you hear that?" "No." Qi Li smiled and said, "Look, Yelena found an ally. You just didn't knock." "Please, you guys laughed so tragically. Even if I knocked on the door, you wouldn't have heard it." "You're the tragically tragic one. Raphael, are you looking for me?" Qi Li asked. "Yes," Han Jin said as he glanced at Miriam. Miriam immediately understood what Han Jin meant and quietly retreated to the door. Yelena rolled her eyes and followed Qi Li. Han Jin was a little puzzled. Yelena had always been curious about him, and unless he explicitly said so, she wouldn't leave. What was up with her today? "What is it?" Qi Li asked softly. "Is it about Morgan's treasure?" "You guessed right." Han Jin didn't want to sit on the bed, as that would be too intimate and could easily cause misunderstandings. He pulled a chair over and sat beside the bed. "How about this? I've already asked Hogan to count all the magic crystals that were shipped over. After your injuries have healed, you can personally check them. After being together for such a long time, you should trust my character." "Don't worry, I won't use you, Raphael, I know. Yelena already told me." Qi Li's expression was a little dazed, and no one knew what she was thinking. "Yelena?" Han Jin immediately understood why Yelena had walked away so cautiously just now. Raphael, I want to ask you 2 questions. After you answer me, you can do whatever you want with the magic crystals. I'll listen to you. This isn't something I can handle, you can ask me after I'm done, okay? Qi smiled. Okay, go ahead. Han Jin shrugged his shoulders. If it weren't for everyone, would I be able to live until today? Qi whispered. Han Jin was silent. At that time, Qi guards had a conflict with a large group of human-faced eagles, and almost all of them were killed. Qi was protected in a cave, and the entrance of the cave was blocked by stones. If no one helped her, perhaps Qi would have already become a skeleton. At this time, he also faintly guessed Qi meaning, but he was still very uneasy. Qi, you can't say that after all. I just want you to answer me, would I be able to live until today? At this moment, Qi was very impolite, and repeatedly interrupted Han Jin. No. Han Jin sighed. If it weren't for your protection and everyone's protection, would I be able to continue to live with those magic crystals when I leave the Holy Crown City? Qi asked again. Han Jin was stunned for a moment. Why do you want to leave? Isn't it good to stay here? I just want to ask you, would you? No. Do you need me to say anything else? Raphael. Qi said in a low voice, for me, these magic crystals are useless. But for you guys, they can be used as a safeguard. Yelena told me that the invasion war of the Abyss world is about to break out. I know what these magic crystals mean to you and the Holy Crown City. Han Jin was silent for a long time. According to Qi words, she should not be influenced by others, but he was still a little uneasy. If you still insist, then you are being unreasonable. Qi smiled. Let's calculate carefully. You saved me, how much should I pay? My life should be more or less worth some money, right? Haha. Han Jin was still silent. Unreasonable? He was just respecting Qi. Was he being unreasonable? Raphael, to tell you the truth, as long as you and the Holy Crown City are here, it is a great happiness for me. Because here, I can completely relax and don't think about anything else. I know you will help me, right? Han Jin was just about to speak when someone knocked on the door. Han Jin was annoyed to be interrupted, but Qi asked first, who is it? It's me. Along with the voice, the door was pushed open, and Hollister came in with a bunch of flowers in his hand. At the sight of Han Jin, his face suddenly changed and he stammered, I am in the wrong room. Then he turned around and ran away. Chapter 471. A loud noise reverberated across the plains near Black Raven City. A moment later, teams of evil eyes, Medusas, and Minotaurs emerged from the cracks in the ground like a geyser. This army was not only large in number, but also extremely complex in composition, covering almost all of the abyssal races. Under normal circumstances, the armies of the abyssal races were mostly composed of 3 major races. The fierce Minotaurs were responsible for attacking, the evil eyes were responsible for launching long-range attacks, and the Medusas were the most special race. They had both long-range attacks and close combat abilities. During the defensive phase, they could assist the evil eyes to kill a large number of enemies from afar. During the offensive phase, they could follow behind the Minotaurs and cooperate with them in close combat. If it was a large army, there would definitely be a group of 10th-grade magical beasts, manticores. Their flying speed was extremely fast, comparable to the elves' silver Pegasi, but their combat power was much stronger than the silver Pegasi. If the manticores successfully broke into the magic army, the damage they caused would be devastating. During the First World War, more than half of the magicians fell under the manticore's sharp fangs. Tens of thousands of vampires appeared at the southern end of the plains. Perhaps it was to show their independence, or perhaps there was some internal dispute. The vampires lined up outside the army of the abyssal races, about 10 miles away. In front of the vampire's phalanx stood 4 elders with different appearances. If an accident had happened to a descendant of the Blood clan, it would not have caused such a big commotion. The death of the Blood clan's ancestor, Alquit, had caused a commotion among the Blood clan. The remaining 4 ancestors of the Blood clan had all moved out to avenge Alquit. There were also dozens of rare Terror Knights wandering around. The Terror Knights were a strange existence. They were creatures, but not creatures. From a biological definition, only living creatures with the ability to reproduce could be counted as living creatures. The Terror Knights did not have this ability, but they were clearly alive and could think. These Terror Knights were the followers of the fallen angel Catherine. They would not obey the orders of other powerful beings, even the great demon Donald. Their personality was very similar to that of the Light Knight. They would not submit to any powerful human beings, but they were willing to kiss the toes of God's statues. Farmer farming on the plains saw the army of the abyssal races pouring out of the ground like a tide. He was scared out of his wits and fled in all directions. Perhaps because of its name, Black Raven City was an unfortunate city. First the elves, then the orcs. Finally, the Han Jin made a big comeback and restored peace Black Raven City. But after a few days the Abyssal Race's army appeared, the Abyssal Race's army. Black Raven City was an unfortunate city. And the civilians. The Abyssal Race's army did not pursue the farmer. They had their own pride. They had come all the way to the surface to fight the Abyssal Race's army. At least, they would not choose the defenseless farmer as their first target. From dawn to dusk, the huge Abyssal Race's army occupied almost half of the plains. Their square formations were connected, and there was no end in sight. All the soldiers were ready to go. Unfortunately, they did not receive any orders from their commander. To be precise, the fallen angel Catherine was not suitable to be a commander because she lived too casually. She had betrayed God and lost her beloved husband and child. She had no more worries. This was an absolute freedom. Or rather, she did not know why she was alive. So many warriors were waiting for Catherine's orders, but Catherine was leisurely strolling on the grassland. Her black wings of light had already been folded behind her back, like a noble and solemn cloak. Her battle skirt was very elegant, short in the front and long in the back. The front only covered her knees, but the back reached her ankles. Her jade-like calves and bare feet were incomparably white. No matter whether she stepped into the grass or on the soil, they were exceptionally distinct. Her sparkling black eyes were filled with intoxication. The blue sky, the fresh air, and the fragrant earth. So beautiful, the Abyssal Race's soldiers were still waiting quietly. Even the distant ancestors of the vampires were silent. In fact, they had been standing there for a long time. No matter what they were thinking, whether they were anxious or angry, they had to keep a calm face. No one dared to disturb Catherine. This was the difference between the first sequence and the second sequence. The Holy Crown City was divided into sequences. Guevara, Jedis, Majordomo Gale, Galbin, and so on were of course the first sequence. Gibran and the others belonged to the second sequence. Although they usually had a good relationship with each other and did not show any disrespect to each other, if there was a real conflict, the second sequence people might not be able to defeat a first sequence person even if they joined forces. After a long time, Catherine's eyes finally moved away from the setting sun reluctantly. Then she thought of something and waved her hand. A Tauran general strode to Catherine and knelt on one knee. "My lady." There was a trace of confusion in Catherine's expression. After hesitating for a moment, she asked in a clear voice like an oriole, "Roy, which direction is the Freedom Federation?" If it was someone else who asked Roy, who was known for his tyrannical nature, would definitely slap that person in the face. Even if it was his own superior, he would not hesitate to do so. "You are the supreme commander of the army, but you don't even know where the enemy is?" But in front of Catherine, Roy was as obedient as a child. "My lady, they are in that direction." Let's go, Catherine said softly. Let's destroy them. Yes, my lady. Roy suddenly stood up and waved his arm. Let's go. Teams of minotaurs, evil eyes, and medusas finally took a step forward and walked towards the south. The manticores lazily followed behind. They were very fast. Even if the army was 100 miles ahead, they could still catch up within a few hours. However, the vampire squad and the dozen or so black dragons did not move because their target was not the Freedom Federation. It turned out that Han Jin's worries were somewhat unnecessary. He thought of himself as someone important, but others might not necessarily think highly of him. Although the purple hell flower bloomed in every corner of the continent, in terms of information transmission, it was still quite backward. At least, it was absolutely incomparable to modern society. Collecting information from everywhere and then sorting it out in detail would take a certain amount of time. Then, it would be sent underground and gathered in Donald's office. Then, the staff would sort it out again and pick out the most important information and give it to Donald. From start to finish, it would take almost half a year. In other words, up until now, Donald still did not know that there was a Han Jin in the Holy Crown City who killed Dragon City's Elder Maxwell. Moreover, it was impossible for Donald's army to appear on the ground all of a sudden. Forming an alliance, dispatching troops, and hurrying on the road would also take time. After careful analysis, Donald's decision to immediately start a war should have happened more than half a year ago. It happened at the same time as the battle where Han Jin killed Maxwell. At that time, the news of Nicholas and Dragon City joining hands to attack the unsetting Sun Mountains had just reached Donald's hands. In other words, when Donald was making his plan, Han Jin had already lost his base and was preparing to take over the Holy Crown City. Who would care about such a small character? Donald's first targets were only two: Nicholas's majestic light empire and the Freedom Federation in the southeast. In his eyes, the area around the Holy Crown City was insignificant. A small Zagund had already messed up that place. Was it worth his attention? As Catherine's figure walked further and further away, the dozen or so black dragons became arrogant again. They didn't even greet the Blood Clan's ancestors as they spread their wings and flew into the sky. Their target was Cold Shadow City. Of course, they weren't going there to attack, but to test the current strength of the Titans. Black Dragon King Fantine was preparing to attack the Gold Dragon. After victory, their next target would naturally be Cold Shadow City. After all, Lord Fantine was a vengeful person. The Blood Clan's ancestors coldly watched the black dragons fly away. After a short discussion, they turned into giant bats and led their clansmen to the north. However, their target wasn't Cold Shadow City, but the Holy Crown City. If Gao Bin and Guevara were here to witness everything, they would be able to determine the most fatal weakness of the Abyssal Race's army. A plate of loose sand. Yes, Donald's influence covered the entire Abyssal world, and he had the qualifications and ability to form an alliance. However, he wasn't the only ruler and couldn't control all the Abyssal armies. Under many circumstances, Donald had to compromise. Black Dragon King Fantine had to attack the Gold Dragon, and the Blood Clan had to find trouble with Han Jin. Could he force all the races to follow his orders? Impossible. Only the fallen angel Catherine was easier to talk to because she didn't care about anything. She could beat anyone up as long as it was fun and interesting. She didn't care because her life was too boring. In this world war, both worlds couldn't use their full strength. One side was disabled, and the other side was seriously ill. When the Minotaur General Roy gave the order, Adolf had already arrived on the God of War. When he saw Han Jin, his attitude was extremely respectful, which stunned Amagi and Guevara. However, to Adolf, none of this mattered. He didn't care about his status, identity, and so on. He didn't even care about his life. As long as he could follow in the footsteps of God, he would be able to obtain supreme happiness. "Sir, you asked me to come. Is there anything I can help you with?" Adolf bowed respectfully. Yes, there is something I need your help with. Han Jin smiled. It would be my honor. When he heard that Han Jin needed his help, Adolf's smile was especially innocent and happy. Even the wrinkles on his face eased a lot. Come with me. Han Jin suddenly couldn't bear it and avoided Adolf's gaze. At this moment, a joyful voice came from behind. Raphael, you're back. Han Jin was overjoyed and hurriedly turned around. Sure enough, Sunir's figure jumped onto the deck. However, what made him feel strange was that Sunir's personality had always been strong, independent, and reserved. She wouldn't easily show her thoughts on her face. At this moment, Sunir's expression and voice were very intimate, but also a little unnatural, as if she was pretending. It was impossible for a person's personality to remain unchanged. It would always change with experience and perception. Sunir was the same. Yelena often whispered to Sunir, saying that Sunir and Han Jin weren't very close when they talked. This couldn't be and had to change. As for whether she was qualified to be someone's teacher with her experience, that was another matter. At least, she managed to convince Sunir. You're back. Han Jin's footsteps were very hurried at first, but after seeing Sunir's strange expression, he slowed down. He walked in front of Sunir, paused, and said, If something like this happens in the future, you must tell me. I didn't want you to worry, Sunir said softly. If you don't tell me, I'll be even more worried. After hearing this, Han Jin suddenly felt the hair on his back stand up. If his senses weren't wrong, his conversation with Sunir had caused some changes in Adolf. I know, I'll tell you in the future. Sunir noticed that there were many people on the deck. Saying such intimate words to Han Jin in public made her feel even more unnatural, so she simply went straight to the point. Here. After saying that, Sunir took out a gray battle robe. The holy battle robe. Guevara laughed and said, Raphael, congratulations, you now have 3 pieces of divine equipment. Han Jin didn't refuse this time. On one hand, he really wanted this battle robe, and on the other hand, he didn't need to refuse. He took the holy battle robe and carefully observed it. After a long time, he let out a long sigh. What are you sighing for? Do you know how lucky you are? Sunir smiled and said, Ever since the Vatican lost the holy equipment, I've never heard of anyone being able to gather 3 pieces of holy equipment. Raphael, I have a feeling that one day, you will make the holy equipment appear on this continent again. This was Sunir's heartfelt words. As long as she knew the whereabouts of the other pieces of equipment, she would do whatever it took to get them for Han Jin. When Sunir said this, she really didn't know that the Holy Apostle's boots were in Adolf's hands. She also didn't say this to Adolf. Adolf was silent for a moment. His eyes were filled with joy. He understood, he really understood. Did anything happen underground? Han Jin asked softly. Nothing. Sunir shook her head. When the mountain army rushed to the treasure room, the abyssal army had already left. They didn't discover us. I think they will appear on the surface soon. That's good. Han Jin smiled. What a coincidence, I also have something to give you. After saying this, Han Jin took out a battle robe. From its appearance, it looked like the leather armor was woven from tree branches and leaves. There was nothing special about it. Sunir was the same as Han Jin. She didn't refuse and gently took the battle robe. She didn't even ask about the use of the battle robe. Even if it was useless, she would keep it because it was Han Jin's gift. Wait a minute. Gao Bin, who appeared later, saw this scene and suddenly shouted, This is the tree elf battle robe. Han Jin said, It can make the elf wearing the battle robe disappear into the forest. Even a super powerhouse won't be able to sense any aura. Of course, Sunir, you can't attack. If you do, your figure will be revealed. Sunir, wear it. This battle robe will give you a few more lives. Gao Bin sighed and then looked at Han Jin curiously. Is there a gift for me? No. Han Jin shook his head. You Galbin felt that he had lost face and sighed again. Just now, he was sighing, but now, he was sighing. Where's my gift? Yelena bit her lips and said in a very low voice. When she saw that the relationship between Han Jin and Sunir was not good, she was worried about Sunir. She could even give advice to Sunir. However, when she was defeated by Sunir, she felt wronged. The complex emotions of a little woman were indeed unpredictable. This is for you. Han Jin took out a magic wand and handed it to Yelena. No matter what his true attitude towards the Dragon Realm was, he was still very grateful to Han Jin. Otherwise, he would have to spend a lot of time comforting Yelena. I knew it. Yelena smiled sweetly and immediately took the magic wand. This is a flying magic wand. With this magic wand, you can fly freely without using any magic power. Moreover, your flying speed is much faster than ordinary flying spells. Raphael, is there a gift for us? Gibran smiled. No. Gibran's face fell, but Galbin chuckled. He found his balance. Adolphe, I also prepared a gift for you, but I'll give it to you later. No matter how Adolphe treated him, he still had to use his honorific. Adolphe was stunned. He never thought that Han Jin would care about him. This was enough to prove his importance in Han Jin's heart. His old face was glowing with excitement. In some ways, he and Sunir had the same mentality. They didn't care about the use of the gift, only whether it was there or not. Come, Adolphe, come with me to meet someone. To be on the safe side, Han Jin had moved Green to an empty room. He could convince Jeds, but he couldn't convince Adolphe. What if Adolphe went crazy after seeing the holy crystal? Yes, my lord. Adolphe bowed again. As a high and mighty ascetic, it was somewhat inappropriate for him to show an obedient attitude in front of Han Jin. However, if Adolphe didn't care, no one could stop him. Walking in the corridor, Adolphe couldn't help but be curious about the person that Han Jin valued. Seeing that there was no one around, he asked in a low voice, Sir, who are you taking me to meet? Green, have you heard of him? Han Jin replied softly. Chapter 472. Apart from Solomon, who was known as the Light of Magic, the most famous sorcerer on the Pan-continent was probably Green Zing. Adolphe had heard of this name before, but his sources of information were somewhat limited. A few months ago, he had only heard of Green Zing. However, after returning to the Vatican, he had read a lot of information related to Emperor Majestic Light, Nicholas. He used to think that he only had two missions. One was to guide the Holy See on the right track, and the other was to go to the Majestic Light Empire to find Nicholas for revenge. Of course, he would do his best to investigate Nicholas thoroughly. As for the relationship between Glyn and Nicholas, Adolphe had more or less understood it. When he heard Han Jin suddenly mention Glyn, he was stunned for a moment and whispered, My lord, you went to the Dragon Realm? Yes. Han Jin nodded. He did not want to hide it from Adolphe. The key was that Glyn's appearance was too conspicuous. If he deliberately tried to hide it, it would not be able to hide it, and it would likely cause a misunderstanding. How could the Dragon Realm give Glyn to you? Of course not. Han Jin smiled and briefly explained the situation, then added, Only you and Jeds know about this. I hope you can keep it a secret. Our current strength is not enough to fight against the Dragon Realm. I don't want to follow Nicholas's path. My lord, you can rest assured. Adolphe paused. But Jeds, what about Jeds? His faith is far from firm enough. Adolphe hesitated for a moment, then said his opinion. He is not trustworthy enough. Han Jin was silent. He did not know how to answer. When they were almost to Glyn's room, he slowly said, Then who do you think is more suitable than Jeds? This time, it was Adolphe's turn to be silent. The unsetting sun mountains had been conquered, and the Holy Sea's talent pool was almost completely destroyed. Whether he hated Jeds or liked him, he had to admit that Jeds was the only and best candidate. Han Jin pushed the door open and walked in. Adolphe followed and carefully closed the door. See if he can be saved, Han Jin said slowly. Adolf walked to the bed and looked at it for a while. He didn't chant a spell, but a crystal white light shot out from his palm and fell on Green's chest. After a while, Adolf said, "My lord, his life force has dropped to the lowest point, but he's still alive. It's incredible. Ordinary magic won't help with this kind of injury. I can only use redemption." "You can use redemption? Are you confident?" "My lord, I was already a qualified ascetic decades ago." Adolf smiled. "But I can't open the gate of heaven here." "Harley!" Han Jin reached out and pulled out the soul-devouring bead. "No!" Harley screamed, but it was too late. Adolf waved the soul-devouring bead away, allowing Harley to return to his original form. In the next moment, Harley was already holding his wand, staring at Adolf. The red light in his deep eye sockets kept flashing, ready to receive Adolf's attack at any moment. If he was alone, he would have screamed and run away. But Han Jin was here, and he had someone to rely on. However, Adolf kept his head down as if he didn't see Harley at all. In fact, with Harley's flamboyant personality, he was already notorious. Many people in the Holy Crown City knew that Lord Raphael had turned an undead creature into a magic tool. Adolf had no reason not to know. He did not say it before because he did not know how to treat Han Jin. But now, he did not say it because he believed that Han Jin must have his own reasons. "Harley, go and tell Guevara to empty the deck. Everyone go back to the cabin." Han Jin saw that Harley did not respond, so he raised his voice. "Harley?" Facing Adolf's disregard, Harley became more and more confused. He did not know whether this was his victory or not, or whether Adolf was deliberately lulling him and was about to attack. Hearing Han Jin's voice, Harley immediately reacted and quickly shrank behind Han Jin. "What are you doing? I told you to tell Guevara to empty the deck. Do you hear me?" Han Jin was most dissatisfied with Harley's cowardice, so his tone was much harsher. Harley seemed to have woken up from a dream. He moved his body, carefully bypassed Adolf, and floated to the door. But his pair of flashing red eyes were always staring at Adolf. It was nothing to stare at Adolf when he was beside Han Jin, but when he reached the door and reached out to open it, he still stared at Adolf. In the process of floating, his head just happened to turn 180 degrees, as if Adolf's figure had an irresistible attraction to him. When the door was opened, Harley immediately ran away. He did not even want to stay for a second longer. Han Jin's gaze fell on Xingling, waiting for Adolf to question him. He had thought of enough reasons to prove that Harley was necessary. But unexpectedly, Adolf remained silent. What Han Jin didn't understand was that, for Adolf, it required a great deal of courage and a considerable amount of time to prepare to question Han Jin. Even if Han Jin was shaking hands with a great demon from the abyss, Adolf would still think that it was a heavenly secret that he couldn't understand, let alone turning an undead creature into a magic prop. After a moment, Harley's voice sounded from the door, "Master, the deck has been emptied." Han Jin pinched his fingertips and shot out 2 charms, one on Adolf and the other on Xingling. He then shouted in a low voice, "Rise." All of a sudden, Adolf felt the world around him spinning. Light flashed in front of him, and he found himself on the deck with Xingling lying in front of him. There was no one else on the deck, only 100 or so thunderbirds on both sides of the ship. They were curiously looking at Han Jin and Adolf, who had suddenly appeared. Little gold thunder spread its wings and let out a crisp chirp. This little thing was getting smarter and smarter. This was just a test. If Han Jin responded, it would definitely jump off the side of the ship and get intimate with Han Jin. If Han Jin didn't respond, it could only stay where it was and not move. "Master, do you really want me to use redemption?" Adolf asked softly. He did not want to go back on his words. He just wanted to remind Han Jin that the redemption could only be used once in a lifetime. Was he sure he wanted to use it on Xingling? This person is very important to us, Han Jin said slowly. Understood, Adolf said with a smile. He slowly stretched out his arms and stared quietly at the gradually darkening sky. Han Jin wanted him to save Xinglin's life. This was somewhat unreasonable. With Han Jin's power, there was no need for him to help others. Even if Han Jin was inconvenienced, the two angel attendants could still save him. This was the second reason. However, Adolf did not think too much about it. If Han Jin wanted him to do it, he would do his best. A violent magic fluctuation came from the sky. Then, a surging white light appeared. The white light was constantly being produced and condensed. In a moment, it condensed into a looming, illusory giant gate. The gate was engraved with countless magic runes. Clouds and mist lingered around it. A suffocating pressure hung down from the sky, filling the air like mercury. That was the gate of heaven. The pedestrians in the city saw this scene. Even those who did not have any knowledge of magic knew that someone was casting a forbidden spell. In the blink of an eye, the flow of people on the street became stagnant. Almost everyone was looking up at the sky. A forbidden spell was not something that could be seen casually. Of course, if it was in other cities, people might have already started to flee. However, the residents of the Holy Crown City had great confidence in Han Jin, because Han Jin's performance in the war had been spread by the soldiers. In the end, it was said that the Lord had fought hundreds of golden behemoths alone. The residents absolutely believed that the Lord could protect the Holy Crown City. If the forbidden spell was malicious, the magician would be crushed to death by the Lord before he could finish chanting the spell. That's right, crushed to death. The gate of heaven slowly opened, and the pressure that was pouring down suddenly increased by a lot. Following that, a gigantic angel flew out from the gate of heaven. The moment the angel flew out, a thick curtain of light descended vertically, enveloping the god of war within. Suddenly, a song that sounded like weeping could be heard in the air. This song was very strange. When one listened carefully, the song would suddenly disappear. Just when one thought that it was an illusion, the song would ring in one's ears again. Following that, the gigantic angel slowly knelt down in the air. It was leaning on a long sword with both hands tightly gripping the hilt of the sword. A pair of wings of light that stretched out over 1,000 meters slowly folded up. In a short while, the giant angel's light dimmed, or the light that made up his body was condensing to a certain point. In the end, the wings, the body, and the giant sword of the giant angel all disappeared, leaving only a tear-like light spot in the air. The tear-like light spot fluttered down and dripped onto Green's forehead. Han Jin once again witnessed a miracle. Green's pale face was quickly turning red. Because Green had changed into another servant's clothes, his wound was covered, so he couldn't see the situation. Presumably, it was healing. The effect of light magic was indeed amazing. Han Jin thought back to the time when he had to face the unconscious Yelena. He felt helpless and sorrowful. "Sir, there is a seal left by the dragons on his body," Adolf said softly. His eyes were still clear, and there was no sign of fatigue. It was as if his magic power hadn't been depleted at all. "Can you undo it?" Han Jin asked. "Yes, I can." Adolf walked over again and waved his arm. A white halo bloomed in his hand. Through the reverberation of the halo, Adolf could clearly see that many dense runes had appeared on Garen's skin. Adolf chanted a spell in a low voice, and with a gesture of his hand, all the runes shattered into pieces in an instant. "His injuries have healed?" "Yes," Adolf replied softly, "and he has woken up." Green slowly opened his eyes. Han Jin had heard a long time ago that if one eye was injured and lost its sight, the other eye would be affected. Perhaps because of this, Green's eyes were a little cloudy. Coupled with his shrunken eye sockets, his appearance was a flaw. Judging from his appearance, Green lacked the temperament and majesty that a great magus should have. Green glanced at Han Jin and Adolf, then slowly stood up. He didn't speak, but just walked to the side of the ship step by step. Green Zing originally thought that it was the sea outside, but when he walked to the side of the ship, he suddenly saw a city below. He was shocked and immediately turned his head to look at the god of war with curiosity. After a moment, he turned his gaze to the outside. After looking for a long time, he leisurely said, "I like this atmosphere." "Atmosphere? You mean?" Han Jin asked softly. "I haven't seen so many people in a long time." Green turned around and smiled. "In terms of scenery, this place is not as good as the Dragon Field. But in terms of popularity, my Holy Crown City is not bad. Yes, I can see that the people here live a very peaceful life. I can't feel the aura of chaos." "You are wrong. This city has just experienced a war, and another war is coming." Han Jin smiled. "Really?" Green was silent for a moment, then suddenly said, "I didn't expect that you could really save me. Then why did you choose to believe me?" "I just took a gamble. Anyway, it is meaningless to live like this." Green sighed. "You tried every means to save me and restore my magic power. You want to exchange the blueprint of the demon annihilation crossbow with me, right?" Han Jin couldn't help but pause for a moment. Indeed, old people were not easy to deal with. The angle of this question was very tricky. If he shook his head, it would prove that he was too hypocritical. If he nodded, it would prove that he was too Philistine. Han Jin smiled and changed the topic. "Let's talk about this later. Mr. Green, let me introduce you to an old friend. Harley, please invite him here." Green Zing looked very calm, as if he was not interested in this so-called old friend of his. He looked around and said, "Who made this ship?" "It's me." Han Jin smiled. "Are you also an alchemist?" "No." "All right, I admit that my question is flawed." Gollin thought for a moment and asked, "Who gave this ship the ability to float?" "It's me." "You are an alchemist?" "No." Han Jin shrugged. "Didn't I just say that?" Green's single eye became even more cloudy. Obviously, he was not used to this kind of conversation. "Mr. Green, why don't you turn around and take a look?" "Your old friend is here," Han Jin said softly. Green turned around indifferently, but when he saw Jedi's, his body suddenly froze and he screamed, "Jedi's, it's you?" "It's me," Jedi said calmly. "Green, you don't seem to like seeing me?" So it was Nicholas who saved me." Glynn's face turned cold, and his tone became very stiff, especially after Nicholas' name. Perhaps it was out of habit, he almost said the word Lord, but he forced himself to erase it. When Green was betrayed by Nicholas, Jedi's was still with him. Green lived a secluded life in the Dragon Field, so he had no idea what was going on outside. When he saw Jedi's, he immediately thought of Nicholas. "Nicholas? He saved you?" "Green, I can't believe you're still speaking up for Nicholas when you're in such a miserable situation. You're really loyal." Jedi sneered. He was a person with an excellent attitude and was always calm, but never mentioned Nicholas in front of him. Green, who didn't know the inside story, had made a big mistake. "He sent you to test me, didn't he?" Green also sneered. "Forget it." Jedi sighed. After all, he was someone who had experienced life and death. After a momentary outburst, he calmed down and said, "Meeting an old friend is supposed to be a happy thing. Let's not talk about that cruel and unscrupulous thing anymore." You. Zinglin's mouth was wide open, and he pointed a trembling finger at Jedis. He never thought that Jedis, who had always been on good terms with Nicholas, would say such words to him. Jedi's then remembered that Green, who was imprisoned in the Dragon Field, didn't know what was going on outside. He slowly said, "Green, compared to me, you're very lucky. After all, he didn't kill you with his own hands, right?" "What could it be?" Green was even more shocked. "Yes." There was a trace of pain in Jedi's eyes. "Because I was in his way, and because he needed my death to control the Light Knight Regiment to attack Lola's alliance. But now he saved me." Jedi's eyes fell on Han Jin. "Just like he saved you." In fact, Jedi's had saved himself, but at that time, his magic power was exhausted. If it wasn't for Han Jin, he would never have been able to survive in the forest of monsters. Therefore, Jedi's had always thought that Han Jin had saved him. Green looked at Han Jin, then looked at Jedi's. Suddenly, he laughed hysterically and crazily. In the end, even his one eye was filled with tears. What are you laughing at? Jedi's frowned. Do you think I'm testing you? I'm not that stupid. Green finally stopped laughing and said breathlessly, making a big ship that can fly in the sky is one of my many dreams, but I can't find a specific idea. What I can't do, someone here has done it. Isn't that enough proof? Then I've always been conceited, and you are also a very smart person, but we were all fooled by Nicholas. Green wiped the tears on his cheek. Whether it's you or me, the Guild of Magic, the Holy See, or even the Dragon Field, we're all just Nicholas tools. When he doesn't need us, there's no reason for us to exist. Haha. Jedis, I don't mean to say bad things, but since Nicholas killed you himself, the Holy See is also in danger. Chapter 473. It has already happened. Jedis' face was full of bitterness. He was no less talented than Green, and he had also realized the danger of the church. That was why he had asked Han Jin to warn the church. Unfortunately, Nicholas had already launched an all-out attack, and Han Jin could do nothing. Nicholas has already attacked the unsetting Sun Mountains? Then the church is now? Green asked blankly. The church only has 12 cardinals and hundreds of light knight left. Nicholas has almost destroyed all of the church's forces. What should I say? Zagreen said helplessly. Nicholas is still as ruthless as before, unless he doesn't move. Haha, as long as he pulls out his sword, he won't give his opponent any chance to win. Nikolai's power has its limits. At least I'm still alive. Adonis, Odd, and Amij have also escaped from his clutches. Jedis' gaze fell on Zinglin's face. And you're still alive. Alive? So what? Glyn smiled. The hidden meaning behind Jedis' words was obvious. They were all alive, so they had to join forces to seek justice for themselves. Glyn clearly expressed his own thoughts. He was not optimistic about the prospects of joining forces. As long as we're alive, we have a chance, Jedis said lightly. If the hope is too slim, then it's not a chance, but a trap of suffering. Green did not want to talk about this anymore, so he changed the topic. Where is this place? I just told you that this is the Holy Crown City, Han Jin said softly. Can you find a place for me to rest? I'm too tired, Green said. No problem. Han Jin nodded. Harley? As he spoke, Harley's figure floated up from the stairs. Han Jin said, Take Mr. Green to his room to rest. Yes, master. Harley immediately shrank back. Green's eyes swept across the incomplete teleportation circle, and finally fell on Han Jin. Is this giant ship really your masterpiece? It can't be considered a masterpiece. I've even forgotten why I built this ship in the first place, Han Jin said with a smile. Glancing at Han Jin again, Zingjelin slowly turned around and walked towards the stairs. Watching Garen's figure disappear down the stairs, Jedis suddenly said, Garen's personality is a bit strange. Raphael, it won't be easy to pull him into our camp. It was Milord who saved him. What right does he have to reject Milord's invitation? Adolf frowned. For the sake of the Holy See, he really didn't want to quarrel with Adolf in front of Han Jin. However, he was worried that Adolf and Glyn would clash, which would make Han Jin's wish even more impossible to achieve. After deliberating over his words, Jed slowly said, Your Excellency Adolf, everyone has the right to choose their own path. For example, you have chosen faith, but that doesn't mean that everyone has to follow your faith. That's right, it was Raphael. Master had saved him. Did this mean that he had to give up everything he had left? If that's the case, then what's the difference between saving him and not saving him? I can understand the latter part, but the first part. I don't quite understand, Adolf said calmly. Why are you talking about my faith? That's just an example. I mean, don't force what you think is right onto others. Can faith be judged by right and wrong, Jedis? Jedis? Adolf retorted. Your Excellency Adolf, I don't want to discuss doctrines with you here. Jedis said. The holiness of this world is shaped by the blue sky, and the holiness of the soul is shaped by great faith. Adolf didn't care whether Jedis wanted to discuss it or not. He continued, if the sky dies, holiness will be hard to find in this world. If faith dies, your soul will fall forever. What is my soul? Jedis was so angry that he laughed. You know it, Jedis. Han Jin felt a headache coming on. Jedis was right. His relationship with Adolf was really getting worse and worse. However, Han Jin couldn't interrupt. If he discussed doctrines with Adolf and Jedis, he would be exposed in less than 3 minutes. Your Excellency Adolf, my faith is to find a place for the souls of all those who live in the abyss of suffering, and to do my best to give them a guarantee. Your faith is to be the most loyal servant. We just have different beliefs. This doesn't mean that one is nobler or holier than the other, Jedis said coldly. Jed said coldly, I have to repeat myself. Do not impose your requirements on others. You are a false believer. A look of pity appeared in Adolf's eyes. He even cast a glance at Han Jin as if asking, Did you hear that? If the God you believe in allows his believers to live in suffering without giving them enlightenment or guarantee, then you must be a false god. Jedis retorted. He was getting angrier and angrier. Jedis had lost all his magic after the accident, so he couldn't warn the Holy See. However, he still couldn't forgive himself because he was the Archbishop of the Grand Light Empire. He had the responsibility to see through Nicholas's conspiracy. He could only blame himself for being tricked. He had to bear at least half of the responsibility for the destruction of the Holy See. However, he had buried all his guilt and pain deep in his heart. When he saw Garen and recalled the past, he couldn't help but explode. How dare you? Adolf was furious. What are you two doing? Han Jin had no choice but to stand up. If he was a step late, Jedis and Adolf might fight. That would be interesting. Did I say anything wrong? Jedis sneered. Okay, Jedis, you can go back first. Han Jin tried to smooth things over. He had already decided that he wouldn't give Jedis and Adolf a chance to meet in the future. As for the Holy See, they could make as much trouble as they wanted. Jedis was silent for a moment, then lowered his head and walked to the side of the ship. Seeing Jedis leave the god of war, Han Jin finally breathed a sigh of relief and said to Adolf, I heard from Jedis that you are a warrior priest, but I found that you don't seem to have a suitable weapon. This is the Hellfire gloves, I hope you like them. Thank you, sir. Adolf took the Hellfire gloves. In fact, as a warrior priest, he wasn't used to using the power of magic tools. However, this was a gift from Han Jin, so whether it was useful or not, he had to accept it. Your Excellency Adolf, the Holy See can't withstand any more storms. You should understand what I mean, Han Jin said softly. Adolf opened his mouth, but when he thought about the declining Holy See, what he wanted to say suddenly turned into a long sigh. It was a quiet night. At dawn the next day, Han Jin woke up early. Majordomo Gale had found the army of the Abyss World underground, which meant that the war could break out at any time. There were too many things to prepare, so he had to buy time. The angels had always been a problem. Although he had spent a lot of energy on the 2 angels, when he asked the angels to treat Green, there were signs of them going out of control. Did he have to completely refine them? Then, one day, when he collected all the holy armors, would he be able to use the power of the law? Now, he had the holy battle robe, and he had to refine another angel. Time was limited, and his energy was even more limited. Would the abyssal race wait that long? When he talked with Guevara about the upcoming World War the day before yesterday, he deliberately emphasized the power of the great demon Donald and belittled the fallen angel Catherine. In fact, he didn't have much confidence in his heart. He had learned enough information from Solomon's library. Although the power of the cherub Catherine was not as strong as that of the Archangel Alpha, she had eternal life. The word eternal was usually only qualified to be used by gods. In other words, the cherub Catherine and the Archangel Alpha were both infinitely close to being gods. Could he really fight against the cherub Catherine? Even if he could, he had no way to decide the battlefield. As the saying goes, when the city gate is on fire, the fish in the moat will suffer. How could he protect the Holy Crown City and his friends on the god of war? Han Jin thought silently. In fact, fear was not a bad thing. Only with fear could he work hard and improve himself. Unfortunately, any form of progress needed time to accumulate and settle down. Han Jin needed time, but he didn't have time. Just as Han Jin was thinking, Gao Bin lazily walked up from below. At a glance, he saw Han Jin sitting there alone. He was stunned for a moment and then smiled. So early? You are also early. Han Jin also smiled. It was indeed very early. The sky was not yet bright. On the deck, there were only a dozen mountain warriors on night duty patrolling the ship's side. The Thunderbirds on both sides of the ship were still immersed in their dreams. It was very quiet all around. Gao Bin sat opposite Han Jin, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "By the way, Raphael, I have something to tell you." "What's the matter?" "The war is about to break out. Hurry up and arrange your marriage with Sunir and Yelena." Han Jin almost choked on his own saliva. He stared at Gao Bin blankly and didn't know what to say. What was this brother-in-law thinking? The World War was about to break out, and he didn't even have time to do business. Why? No, marriage seemed to be business too, at least get engaged. Gao Bin said softly, "This is good for stabilizing people's hearts. Think about it, the abyssal race is about to attack, and you still have the mood to arrange a wedding. It means that you don't care about the abyssal race at all." "Does Sunir know?" "What does she know?" Gao Bin's expression was a bit strange. "If you don't propose, how would she know?" "I mean, you should tell her first and then I will." "Are you still afraid that she will reject you?" Gao Bin smiled and waved his hand. "No, I can promise." "Are you so anxious to push your only sister out?" "I'm not anxious." Gao Bin was silent for a moment. Accidents can happen at any time in the war. Don't leave yourself with regret. "What about you?" Han Jin asked softly. "When are you getting married?" "Me? Who am I marrying?" Gao Bin was stunned. "Lydia, of course." Han Jin purposely reminded Gao Bin. Gao Bin was startled. He glanced around in a panic and lowered his voice to the lowest possible volume. Hey! You can't joke around. It's okay to tell me, but if Lydia hears, she might cause trouble." "What? You think Lydia is not good enough for you?" "That's not what I meant." Gao Bin shook his head. "To be honest, Lydia used to be very beautiful, not worse than Sunir at all." "I believe that," Han Jin said. Only half of Lydia's face was destroyed, and the other half was enough to prove her charm. At that time, Lydia, who was born with the ability to use magic, was the pride of the elves. I don't know how many elves pursued her, but her standards were too high. She always rejected all the pursuers and looked down on all of them. After a while, the young men were scared, and no one dared to pursue Lydia anymore. Gao Bin reminisced about his youth with a nostalgic tone. "It's not because of time, right?" Han Jin smiled and said, "Is it because after you and Lydia became friends, those pursuers gradually disappeared?" Gao Bin was stunned. He thought about it seriously and looked at Han Jin suspiciously. He didn't know what Han Jin meant. "All right, Gao Bin, tell me about your love history." Han Jin sighed as he spoke. He always thought that he was slow in this aspect, but he didn't expect Gao Bin to be even slower. He had already said it so clearly, But Gao Bin still didn't understand. There's nothing to talk about. Gao Bin's eyes dimmed. One chance encounter is a comedy, 2 chance encounters are a tragedy. Did they pursue you first? Han Jin suddenly thought of a question. It's not about who took the initiative. When you have feelings for each other, feelings slowly grow. Then do you have feelings for Lydia? Han Jin immediately asked. Of course, she and I are partners in life and death. Gao Bin looked at Han Jin from head to toe. What's wrong with you today? Why can't the topic leave Lydia? Don't tell me you want to marry her? I'm telling you, you can't. We've been through life and death together, brother, haven't you realized your own heart? Han Jin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I'm not crazy. You mean anyone who dares to marry Lydia is crazy? Gao Bin's eyes widened in anger. Although he was a little slow when it came to his own problems, in other aspects, he reacted very quickly. If I want to marry another one, maybe Yelena will forgive me, but sooner, I don't think she'll ever see me again. Han Jin smiled bitterly. It's good that you know. Gao Bin was very satisfied with Han Jin's attitude. Gao Bin, let's imagine. After all, it was Han Jin's first time being a matchmaker. He didn't want to fail so inexplicably, so he tried to change the topic. Imagine what? If you go back in time and get together with Lydia again, and one day, Lydia suddenly starts to pursue you. At that time, you haven't met them yet, you should know who I'm talking about. Han Jin paused. Would you accept Lydia? Gao Bin was stunned for a long time. Suddenly, his eyes became slightly flustered, and then he said in a dissatisfied voice, Don't talk nonsense, not everything can be imagined. Actually, Lydia is quite pitiful. Han Jin sighed softly. Are you talking about her appearance? Gao Bin said slowly. Raphael, this is fine between us, but don't say it in front of Lydia. She won't accept anyone's sympathy. It seems like you know her very well. I've known her for decades, what do you think? Can't you see? Lydia already has someone she likes. Han Jin said. What? Gao Bin was stunned and hurriedly said, Who is it? Lydia never mentioned it to me. How would I know? Han Jin said impatiently. But I can guess that the one who can move Lydia's heart must be a very, very good elf. Of course. Gao Bin agreed with Han Jin, but he was still doubtful. Are you telling the truth? I can swear, the source is absolutely reliable. Who did you hear it from? It doesn't matter who said it. What matters is who Lydia likes. Han Jin said. Who could it be? Gao Bin muttered to himself. He scanned through the elites of his race in his mind, but he couldn't think of anyone who was qualified to move Lydia. That's why I said she's pitiful. She was immature and timid before, so she didn't dare to say it out loud. After her appearance was ruined, she felt ashamed and didn't dare to say it out loud. She had someone she liked before her appearance was ruined? That's not possible. We were always together back then. If she really liked someone, she would have told me. Han Jin's eyes were a little blank at this moment. After a moment, he said weakly, Gao Bin, what do you want for breakfast? I'm fine with anything. Gao Bin said. Han Jin changed the topic too quickly, and the jump was too big. In the blink of an eye, they went from a few decades ago to the present. From the beautiful love story to the dining table, it made Gao Bin feel a little uncomfortable. Han Jin really didn't know what to do. Most importantly, he only felt that Lydia liked Gao Bin from her eyes and actions, but he couldn't be sure. If Lydia didn't like Gao Bin that way, the joke would be too big. So he could only try to give Gao Bin as much advice as possible, and let Gao Bin realize it himself. Maybe his words were too vague, or maybe Gao Bin was too slow. Anyway, today's effort was in vain. Should he ask Lydia out for a talk? But when he thought about the other elves' comments about Lydia, he felt that it was better to be safe. Telling Lydia directly was the last resort. When I came out, I saw you in a daze. What were you thinking about? Gao Bin asked. Many things. For example, how to fight against the fallen angel Catherine. It said that black dragons are immune to all magic. How do we kill them when we fight them? What do we need to do to ensure the effectiveness of our alliance when we cooperate with Chasam? What is the attitude of the Lord of Depew City? Anyway, there are many things. Han Jin smiled bitterly. Now there's one more thing. How do we propose to Sunir and Yelena? Chapter 474. A team of elves was leisurely walking through the wilderness. There were not many of them, at least 20 of them, but each of them was riding an elegant silver Pegasus. Gaobin had predicted that the army of the Abyss race would appear near Black Raven City, so he had sent hundreds of scouting teams to closely monitor all the plains, mountains, and rivers in the nearby area. As long as they found any abnormalities, the elves could retreat quickly with the speed of the silver Pegasus and immediately report their findings to the Holy Crown City. These elves were one of the scouting teams. According to their designated route, they could turn back along the mountain top after reaching the pontoon bridge in front. Gaobin didn't hide the truth. Along the way, the elves were always on high alert, and they would observe any movement clearly. But now, seeing that they were about to reach their destination, the elves' expressions were more or less relaxed, and they began to chat with each other. Two elves were whispering in each other's ears. The one on the left said something, but the one on the right didn't hear it clearly. He turned his head and was about to ask again when he saw a dark cloud flying towards them from afar. "Captain, look!" The elf pointed at the cloud and shouted. The captain of the team patted the head of the silver Pegasus gently to make it stop. Then he turned around, glanced back, and looked in the direction of the elf's finger. "What's that?" The captain frowned. It was too far away to see clearly, but he knew that it was not a dark cloud, but a large flock of migrating birds. The cloud was approaching at a fast speed. In a moment, the distance between the two sides was less than 2 kilometers. "No!" The captain suddenly shouted in panic. "It's vampires! A large group of vampires! Let's go!" The scouting team was immediately in an uproar. The elves all turned the silver Pegasus around and rushed in the direction where they came from. Compared to short distance starting and short distance sprinting, few magical beasts could compare with the silver Pegasus. In just a few breaths, the silver Pegasus had all turned into silver light, shooting between the sky and the earth. The large group of vampires also saw the elves. They suddenly changed their direction and followed the elves' tail. The speed of the silver Pegasus far exceeded that of the vampires, and the distance between the two parties grew wider and wider. However, the vampires didn't seem to care at all about the widening distance between them. Seeing this, the elven captain's expression changed. The silver Pegasi were fast, but they couldn't last long. If the enemy's mount was just an ordinary horse, then the silver Pegasi squad would be able to chase or escape with ease. However, the enemy was the vampires, one of the races with the strongest endurance. Even an ordinary vampire could fly for several days and nights in the form of a bat. Sure enough, after the elves had rushed out for over 15 kilometers, the distance between the two sides began to equalize. The elven captain gave the order without hesitation. More than 20 silver Pegasus knights scattered in a dozen directions and ran out in a fan shape, like a firework blooming on the ground. The elf captain was not worried about his own safety at the moment. Instead, he was worried that someone had to send the news back. If a large group of vampires appeared at the same time, it meant that the Abyss army was not far away. At a time like this, the elf captain's choice was absolutely correct. Only by spreading out could there be a chance of survival. However, the problem was that there were simply too many vampires. As the silver Pegasus warriors scattered, the vampires also split into more than 10 branches to chase after them. From afar, it looked like dark tentacles reaching for their prey. Time passed by slowly. After running for about 3 hours, they would enter the Bite Man about 20 kilometers ahead. There was a large group of elves stationed there. However, as the stamina of the silver Pegasi gradually decreased, their running speed rapidly decreased. On the other hand, the pursuing vampires maintained the same speed from beginning to end. The distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer. Seeing that the dangerous situation was irreversible, the elven captain roared angrily. He shouted to the last remaining elf beside him, "Run! I'll stop them!" Then, he turned around and ran towards the vampires. That elf stared blankly at the captain, not knowing what to say. He originally wanted to do the same, but he didn't expect the captain to give him the chance to escape first. The elf captain seemed to be aware that his companions were watching him from afar. However, he simply waved his hand without turning his head. Then, he looked at the approaching group of vampires with a sinister gaze. He slowly raised the longbow in his hand. Even if he could only delay them for a second, this news must reach Lord Gaobin. The same scene appeared everywhere. When the silver Pegasus warriors scattered and fled, they were all in groups of 2 to deal with the current situation. More than 10 longbows pointed to the sky, as if more than 10 unyielding flags were erected. Just as Han Jin said, this was not a battle, but a war. In this war between the surface and the abyss, no one would retreat. There was nowhere to retreat. Of course, a mere few elves couldn't scare off the vampires. Although there were bound to be casualties from the elves' dying counterattack, the vampires who were determined to take revenge weren't afraid of casualties at all. The sound of arrows whistling through the air rang out one after another. Dozens of blood flowers bloomed on the black tentacles of the vampires. The vampires in their bat form were too weak. Some of the arrows only lost their strength after piercing through 3 or 4 vampires. Dozens of vampires' corpses fell from the sky one after another. However, compared to the number of vampires, these dozens of corpses were really insignificant. After the elf captain released the first arrow, he didn't even look at the result. He had already knocked the second arrow on the bowstring. When the second arrow flew towards the vampires with a piercing whistle, he mechanically pulled out the third arrow from his quiver. Every single elf who stayed behind did the same thing. It was as if their lifelong wish was to shoot out all the arrows in their quiver. It was as if they were not only shooting out arrows, but also shooting out their anger at the same time. The dozens of tentacles formed by the bats split into 2. One went after the silver Pegasus knight, while the other turned and rushed towards the elves on the ground, who only knew how to draw their bows and arrows. They didn't know the meaning of life and death at all. Facing the overwhelming number of vampires, the elves who stayed behind to fight on their own became even more isolated. Even so, no one stopped attacking. The elf captain was the first to fall. He was the first to decide to stay behind. Therefore, he was also the first to be drowned by the flood of vampires. One after another, more and more elves fell. However, every fallen elf turned into a bloodthirsty beast. They twisted their bowstrings when they couldn't shoot anymore. If their bows were broken, they tore them with their hands or bit them with their teeth. At that moment, the unique elegance of the elves was gone. Every elf's eyes were red. As long as they had a little bit of strength left, they used every single part of their body to fight back. Unfortunately, compared to the vampires who were good at melee combat, the elves' attacks were childish. In the blink of an eye, they were all defeated. It wasn't that the vampires didn't want to leave anyone alive. They just didn't expect the elves to be so violent. A vampire who had his eyeball gouged out gasped for air and covered his wound. He looked at the corpses on the ground with lingering fear. Who said that the races on the ground were weak and couldn't withstand a single blow? If the elves, who were known for their elegance and civilization, were turned into ferocious ghosts who chose to devour humans, what would happen to the races that were always strong? Victor looked at the rows of elven corpses on the ground with a gloomy expression. Every corpse was covered in wounds and tatters. Why didn't you leave anyone alive? Victor's voice was filled with dissatisfaction. He thought that it must be the bloodthirsty nature of his subordinates acting up again. Master Victor, we initially wanted to leave a few of them alive, but these elves resisted too fiercely. Many of the children who went to capture them were injured, so we—" A vampire standing beside Victor replied cautiously. "I see." Victor nodded. "It's not a big deal. I can still find out what I want to know." Victor waved his hand at an elf's corpse. The corpse shriveled at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, a drop of dark red blood appeared between the corpse's eyebrows and flew into Victor's mouth. After swallowing the drop of blood, Victor closed his eyes slowly. After a while, he opened his eyes with a complicated expression on his face. Seeing that Victor's expression was a little off, all the vampires present fell silent. After a long while Victor said, "Pass down the order. Don't let a single elf go." "Yes." The vampires beside Victor immediately bowed and replied. Another large group of vampires rose into the air and chased after the elves in dozens of directions. After issuing the order, Victor's expression returned to normal, but in fact, a storm was set off in his heart at the moment. "It turns out, what I'm worried about has happened," Victor thought silently in his heart. "This news can't be released at the moment. It's too demoralizing. The Lord of the Holy Crown City? A dragon slayer?" Victor thought in his heart, "Should I slow down a little? In terms of strength, Alquite is more powerful than me. If even he can't defeat me, I'm afraid that I won't be able to win either. It seems that I should report this to Lady Catherine as soon as possible and let her decide. But will Lady Catherine care about this?" At this moment, the surviving Silver Pegasus Knights were still fleeing for their lives. After gaining 2 mounts, their chances of escaping had increased. As soon as their Silver Pegasus showed signs of exhaustion, they would immediately switch to another Silver Pegasus. Although the vampires were still hot on their heels, they wouldn't be able to catch up to them in a short period of time. "I went out during the day. Something happened at my friend's house. I really can't finish 5,000 words. I'll try to make it up tomorrow." Chapter 475. After removing the seal, the battle robe of light had transformed from a gray, inconspicuous soft armor into a dazzling armor. The only thing that dissatisfied Han Jin was the carving of an archangel on the front of the robe. The wings of the archangel were spread out parallel to the body, making it look like a cross. Of course, the people in this world didn't know what a cross meant, but Han Jin was more or less traumatized by it. It wasn't easy to get the battle robe of light, so he had to wear it. Wearing it made him look like a crusader in the Middle Ages of another world. No matter what kind of comments the crusaders left in history, Han Jin just felt a little awkward. As his divine will came into contact with the light battle robe, a pure white light floated out of the battle robe and condensed into an angel that was slightly taller than a human. After it appeared, the angel floated in the air motionlessly, as if it was identifying its surroundings. Han Jin didn't pay attention to the newly appeared angel. He turned and walked to the other side, where his 2 angels were. Since yesterday they had been standing still, because Han Jin had asked them to make a choice, but they couldn't make a decision. On the floor in front of the 2 angels, there were 3 extremely rare light magic crystals. The magic crystals' luster was incomparably pure. Even if they weren't affected by external factors, they were still emitting intense elemental fluctuations. Level 12 light magic crystals. This kind of magic crystal was even more precious than fire magic crystals of the same level, because there was a chance that a level 12 light magic crystal would be produced when an archangel fell. There might not even be 10 of them in the Pan continent, but in Morgan's treasure trove there were 5 of them. Not only were the magic crystals valuable, but even the shelves that Majordomo Gale used to store the magic crystals were all made of magic crystals. That was why the magic crystals could be stored for so many years without any problems. "Haven't you made your choice yet?" Han Jin asked faintly. The 2 angels shook their heads at the same time. In fact, Han Jin's question was very simple. There were 3 magic crystals that were exactly the same, and he asked the 2 angels to choose one for him. If outsiders knew, they wouldn't believe that a question that even 2-year-old children could answer immediately could stump 2 angels. Why? Han Jin sneered. It doesn't seem difficult, does it? Because. The 2 angels were speechless. They really didn't know why they couldn't make a choice. Because there's no reason? Really? Han Jin said. I finally know what you are. We are angels. I didn't say you weren't. Han Jin smiled. From a human's point of view, for example, if a beggar was given 2 gold coins that were exactly the same and asked to choose one, and if he didn't choose one, then there would be none. In order to get the gold coins, the beggar would choose one at will without any reason. However, angels couldn't do that. They wanted the light magic crystal. The problem was that the 3 magic crystals were exactly the same. If 2 of them were of a higher level, and the other was of a lower level, or if 2 of them were full of magic, and the other was low in magic, then the angel could choose immediately, even if the shape was different. Unfortunately, the 3 magic crystals were the same, round and crystal clear. In many ways, the brains of angels were similar to that of humans. They could think, judge, and remember. However, Han Jin knew that there was only one kind of wisdom that had the nature of cause and effect. Only under the trigger of cause and effect could an angel make judgments and decisions. That was the wisdom that was created, or in other words, the wisdom that was bestowed. For example, an AI program, of course, angels couldn't be programs. It was said that the God of Light created angels to protect humans. The power of God was unfathomable. However, the intelligence that God gave angels was similar to the artificial intelligence of another world. Perhaps the intelligence that was created had the same attribute. In order to verify his guess, he deliberately did an experiment. The facts told him that his guess was right. Han Jin reached out and picked up a magic crystal. He said softly, "These 2 magic crystals, one for each of you." He didn't want the 2 angels to continue arguing. After saying that, he picked up another magic crystal and handed it to one of the angels. Then, the remaining magic crystal naturally belonged to the other angel. Powerful human. I didn't expect you to find my 2 companions and gain their loyalty, the angel who had just floated out of the light battle robe said casually. Han Jin raised his eyebrows. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Yelena mysteriously walk into the magic laboratory from outside. She was obviously trying to hold back her laughter. Yelena, what's wrong? Gee. Yelena finally couldn't hold back her laughter, but she immediately held it back. Raphael, do you know what Morrison's is doing? What is he doing? He's proposing to Sylvia. Han Jin couldn't help but be stunned. After a long time, he asked, "What's going on?" "Isn't he?" "Who knows what's going on?" Yelena said. "That stupid pig slept for 3 days and 3 nights. The first thing he did when he woke up was to find Sylvia and propose to her. Not to mention others, even Sylvia was scared silly. Isn't this what Sylvia wants? What is she afraid of?" "Ha ha!" Yelena couldn't help but laugh again. Even if she covered her mouth with all her might, she couldn't stop herself from laughing. "Don't laugh. What's going on?" Han Jin was really curious. "He's hugging Sylvia and won't let go. He wants to marry Sylvia immediately." Yelena bit her lips. "I've never seen someone propose like that." Han Jin was stunned for a moment and asked weakly, "Do you think he's normal?" The first thing he did when he returned to the God of War was to scare Morrison's into a coma. Giving Morrison's special training out of kindness was originally a good thing, but in the end it was a little too much. If something really happened to Morrison's, he wouldn't be able to escape the blame. Normal? Yelena was stunned. "He's fine. It's just that the way he talks is a little strange." "Let's go and take a look," Han Jin said. "Okay, I'm looking for you to join in the fun." Yelena giggled. After that, she glanced at the angel and immediately lowered her voice. I'm not bothering you, am I? In Han Jin's words, angels had to be trained, otherwise they wouldn't be obedient. Yelena also knew that Han Jin was training the angel in the light battle robe in the magic laboratory. However, Morrison's proposing to Sylvia was also a big deal. She thought that she had to tell Han Jin about it. No. Han Jin smiled. This guy just came out and his combat power is at its peak. If I don't tire him out, it'll be hard for me to control him. Human? The angel raised his voice. In his memory, he had never been ignored like this, so he was very angry. You two, take good care of him. Han Jin still ignored the angel. He turned around and said to the other two angels. Then he cast a spell, and the starlight in the sky suddenly shot into the distance. The space seemed to have expanded a lot all of a sudden. When Han Jin and Yelena just walked to the door, Guevara frowned and rushed in from the outside. He almost bumped into Han Jin. Seeing that it was Han Jin, Guevara immediately said, "An emergency military meeting is going to be held. Do you have time?" What happened? A few Silver Pegasus warriors have found the traces of the Abyss Race's army. The command system of the Holy Crown City was already in a state of high alert. After Guevara's order, in less than 20 minutes, the commanders of several major legions, as well as Gao Bin and Lydia, all gathered on the God of War. Yelena and Majordomo Gale also participated in the meeting. As for Morrison's marriage, no one cared about it for the time being. If the Holy Crown City couldn't be saved, the marriage would be meaningless. Gao Bin briefly introduced the situation and finally said, "Gathering the intelligence of all the reconnaissance teams, I think that this time, only the bloodline came to attack the Holy Crown City. The other forces have never appeared before." Impossible. Majordomo Gale shook his head. "I saw with my own eyes that their total force is at least hundreds of thousands. I said at least. I sent a total of 133 reconnaissance teams, and the route of each team was personally determined by me. Their reconnaissance network is enough to cover the whole area." When it came to military issues, Gao Bin was not careless at all. He and Guevara were also the strongest military experts in the Holy Crown City. "I can guarantee that any army with more than 1,000 people, as long as they march in the northern area of the Black Raven City, will not be able to hide from my reconnaissance team." "Gao Bin, did we miss something?" "Impossible." Gao Bin's expression was very serious. "This is war, not hide and seek. The Abyss Race's army came to the ground from thousands of miles away, not to play games with us." "Then tell me, where did at least 100,000 soldiers go?" Majordomo Gale asked. "Let's talk about this later. Now we need to talk about what the Holy Crown City is going to face." Gao Bin said, "The facts are in front of us. About 50,000 vampires are approaching the Holy Crown City. With their flying speed, they should have approached the Beatman's Fort Maxine when we hold this military meeting, or they have already attacked Fort Maxine. If their target is the Holy Crown City, they will arrive here between dusk today and dawn tomorrow." "Don't you think the time span is too long?" Ronning interrupted. "It has nothing to do with me. The vampires are too casual." Gao Bin smiled. "For example, what will they do when they arrive at Fort Maxine? How long will it take for them to be satisfied? I'm just curious. 50,000 vampires? Why are they here?" Han Jin whispered. The atmosphere in the conference room suddenly became quiet. "Yes, why are they here?" Currently, the Holy Crown City was not as powerful as Nicholas, who had many powerful subordinates. However, those who gathered around Han Jin were all well-known figures on the continent. Adolf and Han Jin were two demigod-level masters, Jedis, the creator of overlapping magic, whose light magic could cause great damage to most of the abyssal races. Gao Bin and Guevara were both superclass masters and experienced commanders. Majordomo Gale had been with Solomon for many years and had seen a lot of things, so of course, his knowledge was not shallow. Yelena, who was very likely to become the youngest Grand Magus on the continent after Han Jin, not to mention that Han Jin had a trump card, Zhenglin. Compared with the time when Han Jin had just risen, the Holy Crown City was much more powerful. At that time, Alquite, a distant ancestor of the vampires, was already a great threat to Han Jin. Now, even if all the distant ancestors of the vampires arrived, they would still be no match for him. Even without Han Jin's help, he could handle them. So the question was, why are they here? Even if they wanted to die, this was not the way to do it. During this period, the Holy Crown City had been in a state of high alert because of the endless abyssal army and the fallen angel Catherine. The vampires were only one of the factors, they could not be the entire force. Gao Bin, are you sure your reconnaissance did not miss anything? Guevara asked slowly. In this aspect, I have never made a mistake. Gao Bin smiled. Then, I have a very reluctant explanation. Guevara said. What explanation? Han Jin asked. Raphael, do you still remember the distant ancestor of the vampires, Alquite? Of course I do. It was you who killed Alquite. How could the vampires be reconciled? Guevara's smile was a little strange. So the vampires disobeyed Donald's order and came to us for revenge. You said they came to us for revenge. I understand, but what do you mean by disobeyed Donald's order? Han Jin asked. Donald doesn't care about us at all. Guevara said, we are not Donald's first target. The Abyssal Army, including the fallen angel Catherine, should have gone somewhere else. Where did they go? Lang Ning asked. The Freedom Federation? Gao Bin showed a look of sudden realization. Besides Nicholas, the Freedom Federation should be the second most powerful force on the continent. They didn't attack us? Lang Ning stammered. They went directly to the Freedom Federation? Is it strange? Gao Bin smiled. We think we are very powerful, but they may not think highly of us. Gao Bin's words made the commanders of the major legions burst into an uproar. The human heart was so strange. When threatened, they would feel nervous, but the Abyssal Army was too lazy to threaten them. When they went elsewhere, the generals would feel indignant. My lord, we should take the initiative to fight. Saxon shouted. Why wait for them to come? Yes, my lord. Lang Ning said, we have the Magic Legion now. How can those vampires be our opponents? If the other distant ancestors of the vampires also come, it will be my lord's problem. Fight? And then? Gao Bin said with a smile. Beat them to a pulp and let them know how powerful we are. Yes. Saxon felt that Gao Bin's tone was a little strange, but what he said was correct. Of course, they had to beat the enemy to a pulp. Well, after they know how powerful we are? Gao Bin asked. After? Saxon was speechless. He didn't know what to do after that. After that, Donald suddenly realized that the Holy Crown City was so powerful. Well, the fallen angel Catherine immediately changed her target, and I will support some troops to attack the Holy Crown City with full force. Gao Bin was still smiling. Saxon, is this what you want? Saxon stood there, speechless for a long time. I know Nicholas's strength. Jedis, who had been silent all this time, slowly said, no matter how strong Donald is, it is impossible to easily destroy the Grand Light Empire. So, when he knows that a more promising Holy Crown City is about to rise, he will definitely do his best to destroy us. One Nicholas is enough of a headache, and he will never allow another opponent to appear. Actually, when Donald sets foot on the ground, he should also know the strength of Rapharon. If we unite and defeat the vampire's army in the blink of an eye, Donald's gravity will immediately lean towards us. Guevara said. Then what should we do? Lang Ning asked. Actually, Guevara has already told you. Gao Bin laughed. No? Lang Ning's face was full of astonishment. The key is to unite. Major Domo Gale interjected. Guevara, Gao Bin, Jedis, and Major Domo Gale looked at each other and smiled. Originally, the top 3 think tanks of the continent had one more member now. Perhaps only one of them had thought of it, but with just a small hint, the others would be able to understand it immediately. Ronning, Winston, and the others, on the other hand, were still clueless even after Majordomo Gale pointed out the important points. This was the gap between experience and experience. Raphael's strength cannot be concealed. In order to not let Donald change his strategic plan, we can only think of other ways. Jedis explained. So, you and I should fight in front of the whole city. Han Jin sighed. Isn't that too fake? Gao Bin said, Raphael, this is a serious matter. You can't joke about it. If you do this, it will be the same as provoking Donald. I'm just joking. Han Jin said softly. As for the Freedom Federation, we have no relatives or friends. At this time, we can only choose to protect ourselves. Han Jin suddenly thought of the heroes in the First World War. He then realized that he no longer needed to look up to anyone because the former had reached the same height as the latter. Han Jin understood very well that Guevara and the others' idea was not to protect themselves, but to accumulate strength and wait for the right opportunity. It was a type of attack that would soar into the sky in one go. The war had not yet broken out, and the direction of the war had not yet been determined. Guevara and the others had already thought of the distribution of benefits after the war, so they chose to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. This cold and cruel foresight was not much different from that of the holy knight Gotha, who Solomon could not understand. Then we're not fighting? Saxon still did not understand. Of course we're fighting, and we're going to fight with all our strength. Gao Bin's tone was very determined. With all our strength. Poor Saxon was getting more and more confused. Didn't they say that fighting the vampires would attract Donald's main force? Why were they still fighting? What Gao Bin means is that we fought to a draw with the vampires with all our strength. The kind Jedis explained again. I'm really sorry about yesterday. I thought that I could concentrate on writing and make up for the double time from the day before. On one hand, I could give everyone an explanation, and on the other, I could get a full attendance award. But plans can't keep up with changes. I didn't go home for the whole day yesterday, and I only went home after 11 at night. Actually, it's inevitable that there are things in life, and I usually push them away if I can. I'm dead set on being an otaku, but special things really can't be pushed away. Chapter 476. Although the word strategy sounded very heavy, it was actually just an ideology that could be decided with just a few words. Han Jin, Guevara, and the others were all very decisive. They would do what they said without hesitation. After a simple discussion, they all agreed to it. The next thing was to discuss the details of the specific arrangement. Of course, Han Jin and the others' strategy had a premise. That was, only the vampires would attack the Holy Crown City, and the Abyss army that Majordomo Gale saw would attack the Freedom Federation. Without the premise, the so-called strategy would become a piece of paper full of nonsense, but no one asked Gao Bin. If Gao Bin said no, it meant no. This was proof of the mutual trust between partners. Gao Bin, shouldn't you elves also participate? Guevara said slowly. That's right. Gao Bin said, it's hard for the weakened Vatican to restrain Raphael, but with us it's almost enough. Jeds, don't mind me, I'm just stating facts. I know what you mean. Jed smiled. Acting should be more realistic. Gao Bin pondered for a moment. The three of us have constant conflicts, so it's more believable. But there must be a limit, we can't really hurt feelings. Majordomo Gale suddenly said, Gao Bin's side is not a problem, the key is the Vatican. Everyone was silent for a moment, and Gao Bin said slowly, feelings must be hurt. Gao Bin, what do you mean? Guevara was stunned. Yesterday, Raphael told me that he was going to propose to Sunir and Yelena, but now, it seems that we can only postpone it. Wow. Ha ha ha, Master Raphael, Are you going to propose to Miss Sunir and Miss Yelena? Saxon laughed exaggeratedly. Sunir and Yelena were stunned, and immediately blushed. Even Sunir shyly lowered her head, let alone Yelena. Gao Bin, you mean? Guevara suddenly understood Gao Bin's idea. Let Sunir and Yelena. That's the only way. Gao Bin nodded. It's understandable that the Holy See and Raphael have conflicts, but why should we make things difficult for Raphael? Donald has such a high reputation in the Abyss, so he's probably not a simple guy. We have to find a perfect reason for him. Otherwise, we won't be able to hide it from him. Brother, what do you want us to do? Sunir asked. It's very simple. The two of you need to quarrel in public. Gao Bin pointed at Sunir, then at Yelena, and finally at Han Jin. As for you, Raphael, you should be biased towards Yelena and deliberately alienate Sunir. Raphael and Sunir have been together for many years. Everyone knows that they have a deep relationship. Although there were misunderstandings in the past, now that the misunderstanding has been resolved, there's no reason for them to alienate each other, Guevara said. Sunir's face became redder and redder. Whether or not she had a deep relationship with Han Jin was a private matter between them. How could they talk about it in a meeting? No? Gao Bin smiled. Sunir has a strong personality. She doesn't accept Yelena and deliberately embarrasses her. So, when the two of you quarrel, the winner must be Sunir, understand? Guevara and the others looked at each other and didn't say anything. According to Gao Bin's arrangement, it was somewhat disadvantageous for Sunir, but it also proved Gao Bin's style of separating public from private interests. He didn't care about Sunir's feelings and only pursued reasonableness. I understand. Raphael will fight with Jeds, and I'll fight with you? Majordomo Gale laughed. You want to drag me into this as well. Won't really hurt each other's feelings? Han Jin interrupted with a bitter smile. In the beginning, Sunir and Yelena were like strangers who avoided each other. But now, they were talking and laughing with each other. It was not easy. What if they quarreled and resented each other? Of course we have no problem, but… Gao Bin's gaze fell on Sunir and Yelena. Sunir and Yelena looked at each other for a moment and smiled at the same time. Sunir said faintly, We have no problem with that either. Yes, do we have to be worse than you? Yelena pouted. Raphael and Jed's fighting, Gao Bin and Majordomo Gale fighting, Sunir and Yelena fighting, it seems too messy? Guevara sighed. It must be messy. Otherwise, how can those vampires confront us? Gao Bin said. Jeds, why are you always silent? What are you thinking about? Majordomo Gale asked. Jed shrugged and didn't answer. He couldn't lie, but he had the right to remain silent. In fact, after meeting Garen, his mood had been fluctuating. Nicholas's right-hand men, Jeds and Garen, had joined Han Jin. What did this mean? If Nicholas knew, would he fly into a rage on the spot? Although Nicholas was the emperor of the Grand Light Empire and had supreme prestige, it didn't mean that all the prestige belonged to one person. Archbishop Jeds of the Grand Light Empire and President Garen of the Guild of Magic had both received the attention of countless people. If the people of the Grand Light Empire knew that they had abandoned or were forced to abandon Nicholas and join Han Jin, what would they think? Would they think that Raphael would eventually replace Nicholas? When he first met Han Jin, he never thought that Han Jin's power would expand so quickly. It could be described as unstoppable. What was even more incredible was that Han Jin had miraculously subdued Adolf. In Jed's mind, the blueprint for the future was becoming clearer and clearer. He believed that Nicholas wouldn't be able to stop Han Jin. Compared to the two forces, although Nicholas had many strong men under him, he lacked someone who could hold his own. On the other hand, Han Jin's side had too little time, and there was a gap in the internal structure. Using the pyramid as an example, Han Jin and Adolf were both demigods. With the support of Grand Duke Solomon, The top of the pyramid shone brighter than the Grand Light Empire, but the base and the middle of the pyramid were far inferior to Nicholas. However, since it was due to time, it could be made up with time. What about 10 years later? Talents were the foundation of an empire. Which kind of talent was the most precious? Was it the backbone of the structure or the top talent? Of course, it was the latter, because the latter had the qualifications and power to rewrite history. Since Han Jin already had a top powerhouse, all he needed to do was to cultivate and promote the talent. But it was impossible for Nikolai to find a top powerhouse to share his burden. Even if he did find one, would Nikolai trust him? Would the other party trust Nicholas? After all, with Green and Jed's as precedents, who wouldn't hold back a little? It's up to you to decide what to do next. Han Jin stood up with a smile. You're leaving before you're but even warmed up? Guevara smiled bitterly. Are you trying to slack off again? Raphael is going to train that angel, Yelena hurriedly explained to Han Jin. When have I ever slacked off? Han Jin said seriously. Whatever you need me to do, just tell me. I'm Raphael, and I'm willing to go through fire and water for you, Mr. Guevara, without hesitation. Jokes aside, he only cared about the general direction that everyone had decided on. He was not interested in the minor details at all. This was determined by his temperament. Even if he really created a unified empire in the future, he would still leave all the government affairs to others. At most, he would walk around and understand the situation of the people. If he found that the person he entrusted was not capable enough, he would immediately replace him. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Guevara waved his hand helplessly. After walking out of the conference room, Han Jin wanted to go back to the magic lab. Suddenly, he saw the room at the end of the corridor. After hesitating for a moment, he slowly walked over, removed the magic circle that he had placed on the door, and knocked on the door. This was Green's room. He had placed a magic circle on the door to prevent Green from going out. If someone saw Green's face, it would be bad. But what surprised him was that Green seemed to know his place. For more than a day, he had not come near the door. Later, he was worried, so he asked Harley to go there. Green asked Harley for some alchemy materials and some paper. Other than that, he did not do anything else. Come in. Green's voice came from inside the room. Han Jin pushed the door open and walked in. He saw Green busy at his desk without looking back. Han Jin walked over and asked, "What are you?" Before he could finish, Han Jin's voice suddenly stopped. He found that Green's eyes had returned to normal. He took a closer look and realized that Green had made a fake eye for himself. The fake eye was exactly the same as the real one, and it seemed that it could move. If it was not known in advance, no one would have noticed it. You came at the right time. Xingjelin let out a sigh and handed a stack of papers with a dozen pages to Han Jin. This is... Han Jin's heart skipped a beat. He could vaguely guess what was in his hand. This is what Nikolai has been dreaming of. Green thought for a moment and said, "You saved me, and I'll give you what you want. So, I don't owe you anything anymore, right?" "You're leaving?" Han Jin asked softly. "You'll let me go?" Green asked. Han Jin was silent. He could not let Green leave. This had nothing to do with whether he wanted to use Green or not. If he killed Green in front of Long Yu, and if Green revealed his true identity, Long Yu would be the first to find him. At least, before he was confident that he could destroy Long Yu, he would not let Green go free. Obviously, Green Xing was also aware of this, which was why he asked Han Jin. Han Jin slowly flipped through the papers, thinking. Since Green knew that it was impossible for him to leave, why did he emphasize the problem of who owed who? What was the point? "I want to find something to do," Green said slowly. Perhaps it was because he had not communicated with others for a long time, but Green spoke very slowly. Moreover, he would always pause for a moment before speaking, as if his words could not keep up with his mind. Can you let me see the magic array of this god of war? Green asked. I'm not being conservative. Han Jin smiled. You won't understand. Why? Are you doubting my knowledge of magic? No, I mean, they are two completely different systems. Han Jin thought for a moment and said, Do you understand? It's like when we met the ancient goblins, we couldn't communicate with them at all. It is said that the goblins can make airships that can fly in the sky. Green's eyes flashed. Are you hinting that you have mastered the goblins' technology? Han Jin was speechless, but if he denied it, it would take a lot of effort. He might as well admit it. But I have to do something. Green hesitated for a moment and said, I saw an unfinished magic array on the deck. Can I take a look? Han Jin understood why Green had repeatedly emphasized that they did not owe each other anything. It was because Green was arrogant. After being betrayed by Nicholas, he did not want to work for anyone anymore. That was why he insisted on clarifying the relationship between them. You saved me, so even if we don't owe each other anything, I am indebted to you. I don't want to make things difficult for you, so I won't leave. But I have to do something, and I need to relax. If something catches my interest, I can put in some effort, but don't force me to do anything for you. We don't owe each other anything. You have no right to ask me to do anything. Of course. Han Jin smiled. He had accurately grasped Green's thoughts, so he was relieved. With Xing Green's attitude, he would not be welcomed by any of the lords, except for Han Jin, who could accept him. Thank you. Green also smiled, then stood up and walked out slowly. When he reached the door, he suddenly stopped. Can I ask you a question? Go ahead. You have such great power at such a young age. Even Archbishop Jedis is willing to work for you. So, what is your dream? I want to correct you. After Jedis re-established the Vatican in the Holy Crown City, he was no longer an archbishop, but a pope. And he is not working for me. He doesn't like this word, and I don't like it either. Han Jin said slowly, We are friends. Shouldn't we help each other? Help each other? Interesting. Xing Jelen smiled. What is your dream? Re-establish order on the continent, and let people live a good life again. Is that it? It seems to be Nicholas' dream. Han Jin said lightly. Don't you think you should leave a glorious chapter in history? Green asked. Or are you a person without a dream? That's impossible. Everyone has their own dream, and I am no exception. Han Jin said softly. But my dream is a little special, and I can't tell anyone. I don't understand. Why can't you tell me? Green frowned. He thought Han Jin was pretending to be mysterious. Do you really want to know? Han Jin smiled. But you should be prepared. Once I tell you, you will never be able to leave here. Then forget it. Green's reaction was a little cold. I can see that you don't want to stay here. Han Jin smiled. I can also see that you are a person similar to Nicholas. You have the same ambition. Green laughed self-deprecatingly. My blood used to be boiling, but now, I just want to live a peaceful life. Don't compare me with Nicholas. Han Jin always looked indifferent when it came to Nicholas. Do you think he is not qualified, or you are not qualified? Green's tone was a little sarcastic. The overall strength of the magnificent Light Empire was definitely the strongest on the continent. Han Jin seemed to be looking down on Nicholas, which made Green feel proud. It's not a matter of qualification. Han Jin was still indifferent. It's a matter of whether you have that kind of height. Since ancient times, many people have tried to re-establish order, and many people have succeeded. Nicholas is just one of them. Do you really think he is great? Height? What do you mean? Green asked. Do you want me to continue? Did you forget what I just said? Han Jin smiled. Green was a little dazed. His curiosity had been aroused by Han Jin. What kind of dream could be greater than building one's own empire? However, Han Jin had already said that in order to satisfy his curiosity, he would give up his freedom. Therefore, he wanted Han Jin to continue, but he didn't dare to listen. Have you ever thought that before I have the ability to deal with the threat of the dragon field, you must stay on the ship? This period of time may be long or it may be short. Can you wait forever? Han Jin changed the topic. I have sworn many times that the dragon field insulted me. I will repay them many times over. Therefore, I can wait and I am willing to wait. Green said slowly. Also, now that I have the blueprint of the demon annihilation crossbow, I will definitely make it in secret. In this regard, I need your guidance. Han Jin added. That is what I should do, Green said. I also hope that day will come soon. Also, without me, you can't make a qualified demon annihilation crossbow. Haha. A few years ago, Nicholas spent a lot of effort to get my core secret. Unfortunately, he didn't get what he wanted. I have repeated several times, don't compare me with Nicholas. Han Jin smiled. Your secret will always be your secret. I won't waste my energy on it. You misunderstood me. What I taught you was all the blueprints of the demon annihilation crossbow. I didn't keep anything because I have changed my mind. Green said slowly. I said you can't make a qualified demon annihilation crossbow because your magic power is too weak. Why do you say so? Because of the magic transmission circle on the deck. Xinglin smiled. If I set it up, I can finish it in 4 hours. Even without me, Nikolay can finish it in 1 day if he really needs it. He has many excellent mages working for him, and your magic transmission circle. Han Jin showed a wry smile. Xinglin was right. The Holy Crown City lacked excellent magicians. Yelena, Hogan and Kane were the pillars of the city. But strictly speaking, Yelena was the only one who could be regarded as a real strong magician. Chapter 477. Gaobin had made a mistake in his judgment. He had thought that the army of vampires would arrive at the Holy Crown City between tonight and the next dawn. However, it was already dawn, and there was not even a shadow in sight. Of course, it was not Gaobin's fault. He did not know that Victor, the ancestor of vampires, could draw memories from blood. At this moment, the vampires had a general idea of what kind of opponent they were facing. They had refused Donald's order and insisted on avenging Alquite. They had rushed to the Holy Crown City with a ferocious momentum. However, after realizing that they were facing a hard steel plate, they became hesitant again. Gaobin was puzzled and sent out several scouting teams. At noon, the scouting teams returned with news that the vampires had not attacked Fort Maxine, but were still lingering on the plains of Black Raven City. The vampires could be described in one sentence. They were as ferocious as lions, but as timid as rabbits. When facing the weak, they would show their fierceness without any scruples. However, when facing the strong, who could make them bleed, the selfish side of the vampires was undoubtedly revealed. They were timid. The vampires' behavior gave the think tank of the Holy Crown City a headache. Guevara and the others had worked out many plans to clearly reveal the contradictions within their group during the battle. However, if the vampires did not attack, no matter how perfect their plan was, it would not work at all. The think tank had been discussing from noon until dusk, but they still could not come up with a suitable solution. Gaobin was somewhat dissatisfied. They had worked so hard here, but what was Han Jin doing? Han Jin was the master of the Holy Crown City. Gaobin could not tolerate sand in his eyes. Moreover, he had already regarded Han Jin as his family. Once he thought that Han Jin's behavior was out of line, he would definitely point it out and do it. He hurriedly left the meeting room and went straight to Han Jin's room. Because he was not in a good mood, he reached out and knocked at the door, then pushed it open. Gaobin's eyesight was very good. At first glance, he saw 2 shadows quickly separating. However, there was a time difference, so he didn't know what they were doing before they separated. Gaobin looked at Sunir and then looked at Han Jin. His arrogant sense of justice immediately withered. He laughed dryly and turned around to leave. However, he felt that something was wrong. He turned around and wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. Oh no, oh no. Gao Bin cursed his bad luck in his heart. In the future, Han Jin would definitely try his best to give Sunir the cold shoulder and create a false impression. He would also have to reduce their contact in secret to avoid being discovered by others. In other words, the time that Han Jin and Sunir spent together would be greatly reduced. Gao Bin recklessly barged in and disturbed the sweet time between Han Jin and Sunir. Who knew how Sunir would complain about him in her heart? Sunir was at a loss of what to do. Han Jin, on the other hand, was still able to maintain his composure. He laughed dryly and asked, Gao Bin, what's the matter? Nothing. Gao Bin hurriedly shook his head. Nothing? Sunir's eyes immediately became unfriendly. Well, Raphael, the army of vampires suddenly stopped on the plains near Black Raven City. It seems that they don't intend to attack the Holy Crown City. We have to think of something. Gao Bin originally came to question Han Jin, but now his tone sounded like he was pleading. However, if the lords of other parts of the continent heard these words, they would probably burst into tears. The invasion of the abyssal race happened at the same time, and at this moment, many places were already under fierce attack. Countless lords were begging for mercy, hoping that the army of the abyssal race would let them go. Gao Bin, on the other hand, was hoping that they would be attacked. Sometimes, comparisons could really drive a person to his death. The quietness of the nearby area had nothing to do with Han Jin. Donald didn't underestimate the power of the Titans. Although they had lost to the Black Dragon clan, they still retained some of their strength. They weren't very strong, but they weren't weak either. If they sent their main force to attack Cold Shadow City, they would definitely be able to win. However, the other powerful forces would gain some time to breathe. If they sent a ragtag army to attack Cold Shadow City, they would simply be sending themselves to their death. Not to mention, there was still the unknown Grand Duke Solomon. Therefore, after much consideration, Donald decided to let Cold Shadow City go for now. Do you still remember the Black Pearl? Han Jin asked softly. Black Pearl? That sounds familiar. Gao Bin frowned. When the followers were rioting, someone tried to assassinate Qi Li. You followed the killer. I remember now, it's the Black Pearl Inn. Gao Bin suddenly realized. That's right. Han Jin smiled. You said you felt that the lady boss was suspicious. I said she was a member of the Purple Flower of Hell. You want to use her. The highest mission of the Purple Flower of Hell is to cooperate with the army of the Abyssal World when war breaks out. Han Jin said faintly, so, as long as they know that the vampire army is preparing to attack Holy Crown City, they will definitely contact the vampires. Before that, you should put on a good show. Raphael, you could have wiped out all the Purple Flower of Hell here. Why did you leave them behind? Gao Bin asked. Did you know that you would need them? That's not it. Han Jin smiled. Hearing Han Jin's denial, Gao Bin shook his head and heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't think it was a coincidence. Gao Bin felt that he couldn't see through Han Jin more and more. If Han Jin was said to be very intelligent, but there were some skills that Han Jin knew nothing about. For example, when it came to marching and fighting, if Han Jin's intelligence was very ordinary, but the problem that gave him a headache could be easily solved by Han Jin, almost effortlessly. Thinking of this, Gao Bin's eyebrows suddenly raised. He, Guevara, Jeds, and the others had discussed how to deal with the vampire army for the whole afternoon. It turned out that they had wasted their energy in vain. Wasn't this just playing with people? Gao Bin's breathing became heavy, but on second thought, even if he questioned Han Jin could use the excuse of, "You didn't ask me, and I didn't mean to not tell you." Moreover, Sunir was still here, so he couldn't lose his temper. In the end, he could only say, "You can continue." After that, he quickly left Han Jin's room. What's wrong with my brother? Sunir was surprised. She could tell that something was wrong with Gao Bin's tone. I don't know either. Han Jin slowly held Sunir's hand. But your brother asked us to continue. Sunir was angry and amused at the same time. She rolled her eyes at Han Jin. Where's Yelena? Why hasn't she come to you yet? Her? Don't mention her. Han Jin seemed a little disheartened. What happened to Yelena? Sunir was stunned. She fell in love with someone else. What? Sunir was stunned, then giggled. She knew that Han Jin was joking, and she had been in contact with Yelena recently, so she knew how important Han Jin was in Yelena's heart. What's going on? I'm telling the truth. Han Jin shrugged. Han Jin was indeed telling the truth. Yesterday, when Yelena walked out of the conference room, she suddenly saw an old man busily working on her incomplete magic transmission array. She was so angry that she almost flipped out on the spot. However, when she rushed over, she saw that the old man's hands were extremely fast and filled with an indescribable sense of beauty. Yelena was stunned. For a long time, she stood there quietly, watching the old man's movements. In the end, she even smiled and tried to get close to the old man. Yelena had always loved magic. Later, when she met Han Jin, her crazy enthusiasm lessened a little. As for whether magic or Han Jin was more important in her heart, it was a boring question to discuss. Anyway, sometimes she could forget about cultivation for Han Jin, and sometimes she could forget about Han Jin for magic. I don't believe you. Sunir laughed and ran her fingers through her long hair. At this moment, Yelena, who had fallen in love with someone else, walked in. When Gao Bin left, he didn't close the door, so Yelena could enter unimpeded. After entering, she smiled at Sunir. Sister Sunir, you're here too. Yes. Sunir didn't know how to answer this question, so she could only give a vague answer. I won't disturb you, just give me 2 minutes. Yelena stretched out 2 fingers. Yelena, who said you were disturbing us? Sunir's face was slightly red. Hee hee. Yelena laughed, then looked at Han Jin. Raphael, can you do me a favor? What is it? Han Jin was stunned, and he had a vague premonition in his heart. I want someone to be my teacher. While speaking, Yelena secretly observed Han Jin's expression. There was suddenly an unfamiliar old man on the ship, and he was a mysterious old man. Han Jin should introduce him to everyone, but Han Jin hadn't said anything from the beginning to the end. Obviously, this old man's background was somewhat strange. Who here is qualified to be your teacher? Sunir asked in surprise. Everyone admitted that Yelena had reached the peak stage. If she could successfully break through, she would become the youngest Grand Magus after Han Jin. What kind of master was qualified to be Yelena's teacher? No. Han Jin said resolutely. He and Sunir had the same idea. As long as the title of teacher was confirmed, Zhenglin's position would be locked. He would definitely be a super-class master, and his identity would be revealed. Raphael, Yelena said softly, but her hand was shaking Sunir's arm. Obviously, she wanted Sunir to help her. Yelena, this is not a joke. Han Jin said seriously. Remember my words. In the future, never approach him in front of others, and never tell anyone about his ability. What? But he. I know what kind of person he is, but I hope he can keep a low profile. Otherwise, once the outside world finds out, it will bring us a great disaster. Han Jin said slowly. Although it was very likely that the Dragon Realm would fight with the Black Dragons, and they would not have the energy to take care of this, there was another possibility. After the Dragon Realm found out that Han Jin had rescued Zhenglin, they would tell the truth to the Black Dragon King Valentine. After all, it was an internal conflict among the dragon race. However, the appearance of the Demon Annihilation crossbow could threaten all the dragon race, and the Black Dragon King Valentine might even give up the Dragon Realm and appear in the Holy Crown City. In that case, the strategy of pretending to be weak would be completely ineffective. Oh. Yelena lowered her head. Looking at Yelena's disappointed face, Han Jin's heart softened. If Yelena could learn the knowledge of Xingling, it would be a great thing for the Holy Crown City. Well, I will talk to him, but even if he agrees, you should never contact him in public. Do you understand? Chapter 478. A few days ago, my friend's farm was flooded. It wasn't a QQ farm, it was a real farm. It was mainly used to raise cows. He had just bought it at the beginning of last year. This year, something happened. He was so anxious that he could only ask his friends for help in the middle of the night. Actually, they took good care of me. They knew that I was a true otaku, so they assigned me the lightest task, which was to look after things and prevent others from stealing. But the result was very strange. Those guys who were moving things back and forth were all alive and kicking. I didn't move for a few hours, and when I returned home, I was lying down. It had been almost 10 years, and I had never been so sick. I couldn't even get up. In the hospital, I was ridiculed. After careful analysis, the reason I fell sick was because I did the lightest task. It was a vicious trap. I stood in the waist-deep water and waited for the sun to rise. Those guys didn't stay idle from the beginning to the end. Anyone who studied physics would know that exercise could generate heat, but I didn't have the chance to generate heat at all. I kept losing heat. If I had to do the heaviest work, I would definitely be fine. I learned from my mistakes. In the future, whoever I meet will take care of me. I must be careful, and careful. I asked my brother to go on my author account and explain it to everyone. Maybe I didn't explain it clearly because I was dizzy, or maybe he was too stupid. In any case, he didn't understand in the end. Also, he was afraid that I would be anxious, so he didn't directly answer my confirmation. At that time, my reaction and observation skills were at their lowest point, so I couldn't tell. When I returned home, I found out that he only updated, but didn't release any chapters. Now that I've just returned home, I'm preparing to flip through the previous chapters. There's a big gap in the rhythm, so I have to find the feeling again. I'll take a look at my body's condition. I don't know if I can write today, but I'll definitely go back to normal tomorrow. I'll use this opportunity to update earlier. I know that updating in the middle of the night isn't good for everyone, and it's not good for me. Finally, I apologize to everyone once again. But I'm doing a good deed, so please forgive me. Chapter 479. The news of the invasion of the army of the Abyss World had spread in the Holy Crown City. This kind of thing could not be hidden. All the mage towers were in a defensive state 24 hours a day, which required a lot of high-quality magic crystals. If there was no threat, of course, the consumption would not be in vain. However, the people living in the Holy Crown City did not panic. After all, they had a powerful lord, the Holy See, and the elves as allies. People believed that they could continue to live a stable and peaceful life. Because of the chaos in the continent, most people's knowledge had been limited to one city or one region. Even Cold Shadow City, which belonged to the same region, felt particularly distant in people's minds. Not to mention that Han Jin's magic attainment was indeed outstanding. Therefore, the people of the Holy Crown City believed that Han Jin was definitely one of the strongest people in the continent, and there was no need to worry about the future. Even Grand Duke Solomon, who was known as the Light of Magic, tried to marry his daughter to him. However, in the past few days, several bad news had spread to people's ears. One was that Lord Raphael and the Pope of the Holy See had a falling out. It was said that under the influence of a mysterious person, Lord Raphael, who had always been peaceful, changed his attitude and became particularly aggressive. In a meeting, Lord Raphael was so angry that he kicked over the table on the spot. Another was that Lord Raphael's two fiancées also had a conflict. The chief magistrate, Lord Schumann, was celebrating his birthday, so he specially held a banquet in the night of bliss. As the new noble of the Holy Crown City, Schumann had a great reputation and even invited Sunir and Yelena. Unfortunately, the atmosphere of the banquet was not bad at first, but later, after drinking some wine, Sunir and Yelena quarreled over some trivial matters. The two girls were not willing to give in. Fortunately, Schumann saw that the situation was not good and hurriedly sent people to find Gao Bin and Majordomo Gale. Gao Bin and Majordomo Gale were both legendary figures in the world. Naturally, they wouldn't fall out with each other just because of personal feelings. They were very harmonious with each other. One scolded his sister, and the other forcefully dragged Yelena away. Thus, the matter came to an end. There were always many smart people in the world. Some people found that Gao Bin and Majordomo Gale, who used to eat together every day, separated on the second day. They sat at two separate tables and did not speak to each other for the whole day. Although they kept talking and laughing, the atmosphere was very subtle. The strange thing was that the news of the invasion of the Abyss world only made people talk about it for a few days, but what happened later shocked people. It was not that people in the Holy Crown City were ignorant of right and wrong, but the key was education. Only the nobles could enjoy a systematic education, while the commoners had very little access to education. For the latter, they could only learn about the races of the Abyss from the bard. It was undeniable that most legends severely distorted historical fact. The heroes were like brilliant saints, while the enemies were often clumsy, stupid, and incompetent. Even the most ferocious enemies were somewhat comical in their fierceness. Did they need to worry about the stupid and incompetent enemies? The answer was obvious. It could even be said that the commoners were far more confident in their victory than Han Jin. However, the relationship between Han Jin, the Vatican, and the elves could affect the future of the Holy Crown City. Through the riot of the believers, people had seen Han Jin's iron fist, and no one wanted to see another storm in the Holy Crown City. In an inconspicuous corner of the Holy Crown City, an inconspicuous inn slowly closed its door. Closely after that, a shabby carriage quietly left the inn. It finally dawned on Han Jin that secrets were the easiest to deteriorate. After he rescued Green, he had made up his mind to only tell Guevara and Jedis that they had to be careful to ensure the safety of the Holy Crown City. However, when it came to the operation, he found that it was very difficult. To deal with the Dragon City and the Dragon Realm, a large number of demon annihilation crossbows were needed. That was unrealistic. Besides, Green had already expressed his attitude. If he helped, it would be a favor. If he didn't help, there was nothing he could say, because they were even. In the Holy Crown City, the most qualified person to preside over the production of the demon annihilation crossbows was Yelena, followed by Hogan. Let Hogan do it? Not to mention whether he could handle it alone, sooner or later, the demon annihilation crossbows would be known to the world. What would Yelena think if she knew? Well, let Yelena preside over it, but hide it from Sunir. What would Sunir think if she knew? Well, tell Sunir, and tell Sunir to hide it from Gao Bin? And he even told Yelena to hide it from Grand Duke Solomon? In fact, Han Jin's interpersonal relationships were very complicated. After he took over the Holy Crown City, it became a hodgepodge city. Many forces had representatives here. Yelena and Majordomo Gale came from the capital of elements, Gao Bin and Sunir came from the Wild Willow City, Adolf and Jedis represented the Holy See, Dominique was from the Thunder Titan, Dwight Steele, Winston and Saxon were all mercenaries from the isolated Cliff City, and now the Chamber of Commerce of the isolated Cliff City had also settled here. Lang Ning was from the Bite Man, Alan Ritter was the general of the Cummins City, and there were many others. In short, if they didn't handle it properly, it could cause a rift. Because of this, Han Jin and Han Jin had a headache for a few days. In the end, it was Han Jin who made the final decision. Since they were friends, he had to trust them. Although everyone's personality was very different, some were calm, some were childish, some were naturally optimistic, and some were shy. Regardless of whether they were mature or not, when it came to a matter of life and death, Han Jin should trust his friends. Han Jin specially held a core meeting about the demon annihilation crossbows. He told everyone that the famous Grand Magus and Grand Alchemist Zhenglin was on the God of War, and asked everyone to keep it a secret no matter what. The meeting room was in an uproar. Everyone's expression was the same. First, they were stunned, then they were ecstatic. Although the footprints of humans had spread to every corner of the continent and had become the mainstream of the world, the existence of the dragon race had always been like a huge mountain that pressed down on the heads of humans. Even the great empire that unified the world had to bow down to the dragon race. At most, they would adopt a non-violent and non-cooperative attitude, but they would never dare to openly provoke the dragon race. Once a war broke out, humans would not be able to withstand it. The giant dragons would come and go as they pleased. A large number of giant dragons could completely destroy a city in an instant. Moreover, the real deciding factor of a war was the battle between the strongest. In this aspect, humans were at an absolute disadvantage, so they could only endure. Dragon slayers were often the greatest heroes in people's hearts. This kind of mentality more or less showed the dissatisfaction of humans. Among everyone, the most excited was Yelena. She had a discerning eye and had wanted the mysterious old man to be her teacher. Now that she knew Zhenglin's identity, Yelena's wish was even more urgent. Solomon's personality was a bit strange. He had never systematically taught Yelena anything, only occasionally giving her a few pointers. Strictly speaking, Yelena's achievements today were almost all self-taught. This was one of Yelena's regrets in life. Strict fathers and loving mothers were said to be, but Solomon was neither strict nor kind. He almost always had a laissez-faire attitude towards his children, allowing them to grow up freely. Yelena had always wanted to be praised by Solomon, but to this day, she had not been able to achieve it. Little did they know that what Solomon wanted his descendants to inherit the most was not the attainments in magic, but knowledge. To him, magic was just a carrier to realize his ideals, just like how the body was the carrier of the soul. He had tried, but his children were not cut out for it. In the end, he gave up sadly. When Yelena received the blueprint of the demon annihilation crossbow, she was even more excited. She immediately locked herself in her room and devoted herself to researching the manufacturing process of the demon annihilation crossbow. However, in the eyes of outsiders, Yelena was obviously angry with Sunir. Late at night, a man in black quietly boarded the God of War. This person never lived on the God of War. Every time he boarded the ship, he would try his best to hide in his cloak so that others could not see his face. However, in his hand was a token that could only be used on the God of War. The mountain warriors on night duty did not stop him and pretended not to see him. Han Jin was in his room discussing matters with Han Jin when someone knocked on the door. Following a "come in" from Han Jin, Kutini pushed the door open. Kutini's character was a bit strange. He had been missing his old master, but Han Jin was very generous. He could accept this kind of nostalgia. Perhaps this was the reason why he had won Kutini's true loyalty. Kutini usually stayed in front of Zagun's grave. Han Jin rarely used him. When he was really needed, Kutini would not refuse Han Jin's call. However, he was not used to cooperating with Han Jin's people. He preferred to work alone or find his own subordinate. "Sir, the landlady of the Black Pearl Hotel left the Holy Crown City yesterday," Kutini whispered. "I have been following her to the vampire's camp." Han Jin and Guevara looked at each other and asked slowly, "What did you find?" "I didn't dare to rush in. Among those vampires, there should be someone as strong as Alquite." "I can't hide from them," Kutini replied. "However, when I waited until this morning, I found that those vampires were moving. I guess they are going to do something." "That's a good thing." Guevara smiled. "We should also respond. If we keep delaying, it will inevitably arouse suspicion. But they dare to provoke us with this information? They will test us first, Han Jin said faintly. No matter what our impression of them is, in their eyes, vampires are the most arrogant race. After months of marching, they rushed to the surface to take revenge on me. But they were scared by us. Oh, their pride won't allow it. So, as long as there is a little bit of information that is beneficial to them, it will be a reason for them to stop being patient. Vampires have a very long lifespan. Many of them have lived for hundreds or even thousands of years. Don't underestimate them. Guevara said. Have they lived for thousands of years or have they slept for thousands of years? Han Jin showed a sarcastic smile. Is that still considered alive? I have dealt with Alquite before. I know them. So be it. Tomorrow we will take the initiative to attack. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.